The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
An amendment offered by Mr. Roemer of Indiana.
What time do you have in your amendment? 45 minutes. I'll be back. I've got to finish chairing the committee, but I'll be back.
The committee will come to order. Will the members standing in the well please take their conversations to the cloakroom? The clerk will proceed.
Page 4, line 11 through page 6, line 2. Amend subsection A to read as follows. A, Space Station Freedom. The administrator shall cancel the Space Station Freedom program. There are authorized to be appropriated to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration for the cost of such cancellation for fiscal year 1994, $825 million. Page 12, lines 10 and 11, strike paragraph 1. Page 12, line 12 through page 16, line 9.
Unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent that all debate on this amendment and all amendments thereto be concluded in 3 hours, with time to be equally divided between myself, Chairman Brown, Mr. Walker, and Mr. Zimmer.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I would first like to begin by asking for regular order.
House is not in order. The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 45 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would first of all like to yield myself 4 minutes.
Without objection.
Madam Chair, this amendment, simply put, would terminate Space Station Freedom. I would like to begin by thanking a number of the co-sponsors on this amendment that have worked so hard through the last year, and in Mr. Zimmer's case, over the last 2 years, to end this Space Station Freedom program. I'd like to thank Mr. Shays, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Upton, Carolyn Maloney, Dick Durbin, Tom Barrett, a number of the freshmen that have been helping us whip on this particular program, and ask that all the co-sponsors, 16 co-sponsors, be included as if read.
Without objection.
Madam Chair, as we debate this very, very important amendment, I would like to bring up the name of a president that challenged us to put a person on the moon in the 1960s, and that was President Kennedy. President Kennedy asked this country to plan wisely and dream big. And we did. We put a man on the moon by 1969. We saw the success of Apollo 11, where we returned $7 for every $1 invested from NASA. Now, while those glory days are gone, they are not over. This amendment hopes to return to the days of Apollo 11, the days when we have successful technology spin-offs and good jobs, the days when we are all proud of NASA and we don't have an average cost overrun of 76% on each individual item. President Kennedy also said, if not now, when? If not us, who? It is us, members of Congress. We are going to have to make some of these tough decisions to restore NASA to the days of credibility and prominence, discovering new frontiers. We are going to have to help NASA in supporting the small science programs like the Earth Observing System, the Magellan program, the Explorer, programs that are returning good data for us but are threatened to be cut off by a bloated space station. We need to look at the common sense of this amendment, Madam Chair. We are faced with a $300 billion budget deficit. We cannot afford to go on spending money in a callous and cavalier manner such as we have on this space station, where we have experienced a $1 billion cost overrun just this year. Finally, we will hear arguments, Madam Chair, about we need to participate because it is important for our international partners. whereby our international partners, such as the Japanese, are not helping us out on the superconducting super collider. They are not helping us out with our trade negotiations in the world. They are not helping us out in a number of important science projects. We should not feel compelled to spend $100 billion on a space station because the Japanese want us to take the lead so they can spend a couple $1 billion. We will also hear panaceas, arguments that this is a panacea for every disease imaginable. We have to be realistic, Madam Chairperson. We fund 1 out of every 4 approved grants in the NIH budget.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I would yield myself 1 extra minute, Madam Chair.
Without objection.
We are not adequately dealing with our budget at NIH, only funding 1 out of every 4 approved grants for diseases, for heart disease, breast cancer, prostate cancer. We have AIDS problems in this country, lots of problems here on Earth that we are not dealing adequately with our already limited NIH budget. So when you hear these arguments, I hope that you apply some pragmatism, some reality, and some common sense to these arguments, given the problems that NASA faces, given the problems of a huge budget deficit, and given the tough choices that we have to deal with here in the United States Congress with an escalating budget deficit. I would urge particularly the freshmen to vote with this Roemer Zimmer amendment. Thank you, Madam
Gentleman's
Chair.
time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Madam Chairperson, I rise in strong opposition to the amendment by Mr. Roemer, and I urge all of my colleagues to vote against it, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection. Gentleman is recognized.
Over the past 5 years, the House has voted on 5 separate occasions to continue the space station program. There have been many arguments made in favor of and against the space station since the beginning of this program. One central issue, which all agree on, however, is that the space station is at the heart of the manned space program. Without the space station, our nation's long commitment to the manned exploration of space will be at an end. We will have walked away from the legacy of the Mercury, the Gemini, the Apollo, and the Skylab programs. And what will we have gained by this decision? Will we have balanced the budget? Will some other field of science experience a windfall? I am certain that no one 10 years from now will have the slightest idea of what we gained this day, but they will certainly know what we lost. We will have lost the opportunity to establish man's permanent presence in space and accomplish the dream that President Kennedy inspired us with 30 years ago. Ever since the first American flew into space, our space program has been a steady progression of technology and human will, all directed toward one goal: to achieve the capability to do things in space. Not just go there and return, but to live and work there on a permanent basis, to produce things and achieve scientific results rather than to merely survive. Today, as we debate this issue, the Space Shuttle Endeavour is flying overhead, its crew struggling to scratch the surface of what might be possible. We have flown 56 such shuttle missions, and we are still learning. All of the shuttle missions flown to date barely amount to a year's worth of work in orbit. Opponents of the space station are fond of counting what they refer to as missions of the space station and explaining how these have gone away with each space station redesign. The truth of the matter is that there's only one mission for the space station, and it hasn't changed. Its mission is to establish an outpost in space in which we can work on a continuous year-round basis. This is and always will be the next logical step in our manned space program. Once this initial step is taken, all those other things will follow. In the zero-gravity environment, we can study and conquer metallurgical problems and begin to understand and perhaps even manufacture valuable new alloys in space. In that environment, we can grow more perfect crystals of critical proteins and understand their structures. We can understand not only effects of gravity on our biological functions, but how these systems fundamentally work. Madam Chairman, I also want to point out that we are not alone in this commitment. The space station is also the centerpiece of the national space programs of Canada, Japan, and 10 European nations. They perceive the same logical progression in space, the same potential benefits that can be realized. We have signed intergovernmental agreements that require cost sharing of the type that I hope will be the hallmark of all our future endeavors in science. We're also discussing with the Russians the prospects for broadening this international cooperation. Certainly, the end of the Cold War should drive a dramatic realignment in the competition in space which has characterized the past 30 years. This is a difficult process, and it is vital that we demonstrate our own ability to follow through on such undertakings as the space station. Finally, I want to ensure that all my colleagues clearly understand the progress that has been made in the station program thus far and the work that remains to be done. We've now spent over $8 billion on the station, and our partners have spent over $3 billion. We and our partners have developed a design we know will work and will serve the needs of the user community. There are tens of thousands of detailed engineering drawings and many subsystems that we will use which have already been built. The President's call for a redesign early this year was, to be sure, a difficult challenge. The President envisioned a major cost reduction and commissioned a review of alternate designs. What emerged was in some ways remarkable, but in some ways not surprising at all. First of all, there are no better designs. The station has gone through countless such reviews over the past 6 years. And certain fundamental features of the station have been validated time and again. What the President and the Blue Ribbon panel he commissioned to review the station concluded was that we should continue the space station program and take advantage of the work that has been done thus far. What was accomplished, however, is nevertheless a major cost reduction. In order to accomplish these goals, there will need to be a major reduction in management overhead and a dramatic increase in government efficiency. I believe these things can be done, and they will have consequences far beyond the space station. Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I want to conclude by calling the attention of my colleagues to the letter that was received by the Speaker from the President on H.R. 2200. This signifies that for the first time ever that there's a broad consensus on the need for an approach to the space station that is shared by the Authorizing Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and by the President. Now is the time to reaffirm our commitment to the program. I urge my colleagues to vote against the Roemer amendment.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Shortly after he took office, President Clinton concluded that space station freedom was going to cost more than we could afford. So he directed NASA to prepare 3 options for building a space station that would require the nation to spend between $5 billion and $9 billion over the next 5 years. After 3 months of frantic and dedicated work by NASA engineers and managers, 3 space station designs were submitted to the President for his review. But each design cost far more than the President's targets, and each design also delayed or eliminated entirely significant capabilities of the current program. Last week, the President endorsed NASA's Option A, but said he would enhance it with elements of the more capable Option B. Well, according to NASA's and the President's own according to NASA's numbers and the President's own Blue Ribbon Review panel, Option A costs $12.8 billion. Option B costs even more. But by using what could only be called political math, Bill Clinton announced that the 5-year cost of this space station program would be only $10.5 billion. We've seen before the promise of a capable, inexpensive space station, and we've seen that it's been an illusory promise. When it was first proposed in 1984, the space station was to be a space-based workshop, a laboratory, an observatory. It was supposed to be a transportation hub, a repair shop, a warehouse. Taxpayers and Congress were told it would cost only $8 billion to build this beauty. But the experts, including then NASA Administrator James Beggs, knew that it would cost more. Rather than reflecting actual cost estimates, the $8 billion figure was chosen because it seemed politically viable. But that decision undermined the program's credibility throughout its life, and it doomed it to an endless series of political battles. As costs went up, capabilities diminished, and the rest of our space program was cannibalized. By ignoring the sober assessments of his own blue ribbon panel, President Clinton has again consigned the space station program to the political thicket. Congress is again debating the future of an imaginary space station program, one that was created out of whole cloth inside the White House, one that does not bear resemblance to any of the options created by NASA's engineers and reviewed by the President's experts. It's a space station program based on politics rather than science. In a White House briefing about the new space station plan last week, senior administration officials admitted to the press that they could not provide details about what the new space station would look like, who would build it, what it would do, the extent of participation by Russia, Canada, and other foreign nations, or the planned orbit. We were told that these essential facts would be revealed only after 90 more days. That is, only after Congress has agreed to pay for whatever it is that we're building. But somehow these same administration officials who were giving the briefing knew that whatever it was we are building would cost exactly $10.5 billion. Now let's focus on this magical $10.5 billion number for a moment. At this point, the administration is asking us to buy a pig in a poke. The administration cannot explain how a 5-year, $12.8 billion space station program will have its capabilities expanded, yet cost only $10.5 billion. If the space station program should survive, we'll hear a great deal in the future about how the $10.5 billion number was never intended to represent the entire cost of the program and how we need to spend a lot more on it. With all of the numbers flying around in this debate, it's easy to get confused. Proponents of the program will keep repeating the number $10.5 billion while being little to explain what it includes. Here's what it doesn't include. It does not include the money already spent, which is roughly $9 billion, more than $10 billion at the end of the fiscal year. And because the station won't be fully operational within the 5-year budget frame, it doesn't include the money needed to complete construction. That's going to be at least $3.7 billion and probably a lot more due to the stretched out construction schedule, which NASA admitted this week could delay completion for 2 years. The $10.5 billion number does not include the extra billions needed to add upgrades from option B. And it does not include the full cost of payloads. Finally, it doesn't include the money needed to use the space station once it's built, which is at least $1.4 billion annually. NASA itself has estimated that the full cost of option A without any upgrades is $47 billion. $47 billion. But without supporting details, there's no way to know for sure how much whatever it is we're buying today is going to cost. One way to put the new costs in perspective is to listen to space station advocates who are boasting that the latest redesign will save taxpayers $8 billion. Just remember, that's the total amount we originally planned to spend. Let's not let ourselves be deluded again by lowball budget estimates. It's time to stop the hemorrhaging. It's time to cut our losses and those of our foreign partners. It's time to terminate the space station once and for all.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lewis.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Chairman, I rise in opposition to this amendment and in strong support of the space station. It is no secret that opponents of the station have employed the old strategy of divide and conquer. They attempt to prove that a station is not the best method of conducting certain individual missions. In doing so, however, they show exactly why it is needed. They say it is not the most efficient method of conducting scientific research or of conducting medical research, or that it may not be the best way of preparing for future endeavors, or to inspire children to become young scientists. Each isolated argument just might be true. But by using this argument, they beg the next question. Is it the best method of pursuing all of these goals? The answer is yes. For just over 1/1000th of our budget, we can continue to conduct space research which will have applications none of us can yet imagine. After all, could any of us imagine just a few years ago that our space station program would lead to advances in areas such as wastewater treatment, liquid crystals, materials, batteries, engines, and microbiology? I dare say no. If the same short-sighted attitude were applied just a few decades ago, we might likely be without such taken-for-granted items like anti-lock brake systems for cars and magnetic resonance imagers, artificial knees, and hips. With regard to budget considerations, few in this chamber can match my voting record on budget matters. I strongly believe we must balance our budget like any family in America, and my voting record shows that belief. However, when an American family runs into tough times, they do not take funds from their children's education to cut out unnecessary spending. They cut out unnecessary spending. Cutting the station would be tantamount to taking money from a child's education to continue to eat dinner out every night. Finally, the opponents of the station want to have it both ways. They claim they are not against a space program. They tell you they believe the station is crowding out other NASA programs. This implies their savings would go to other NASA programs. However, in the next breath, they claim they are doing this to cut the deficit, citing unrealistic numbers. My friends, it can't be both ways. Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chairman, we all know the case for the space station in terms of economic benefits and the advancement of science. But there is one more very important reason, and that is, and I still believe, may I have one more minute? Well, thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Chair, I recognize for 2 minutes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Frank.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, I congratulate the authors of the amendment and hope it's adopted. The space station is not a bad thing. It's a very good thing. It's marginally better with people on it. We don't have the luxury in this House of killing only bad things if we want to cut the deficit. We have incurred a deficit, by and large, by doing a number of good things, things people wanted, and not paying for them. The question is not whether in the abstract there is any value to a manned space station or not, but how it stacks up in terms of priorities. Now, it is true the space station has been evolving because of the need to control the cost, but the rationale has also been evolving. We used to hear about the importance of America being number one. We used to hear about the psychological and geopolitical and world political aspects of this. That's no longer the case. A large part of this argument clearly was, I recommend that people go back to the prior debates if they have nothing else to do. Look at the arguments. They were that America must be number one, that we were challenged to do this by the Soviet Union. One whole strong rationale for the manned space station, the international competitive aspect, has completely collapsed. Nobody argues that if you said to any objective panel of scientists, here's this amount of money, what would you spend it on to get scientific benefit, that they would say adding men to the space station would be the way to do it. That doesn't mean that there's no benefit. There is some benefit from it, but there is far less than from a number of other things. In particular, we talk about deficit reduction. We are underfunding Pell Grants. You talk about taking money from children's education. We're doing that in this budget. We're underfunding Pell Grants. We're underfunding Head Start. We're underfunding basic services. We're talking in the budget that's being considered in the unmentionable cutting Medicare. How can you justify the tens of billions for putting men on the space station in that context?
Gentleman, time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
I would like to yield such time as he might consume to the distinguished chairman of the Space Subcommittee, Mr. Hall of Texas.
Gentleman is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Madam Chairman, I thank you, and I, of course, rise in active opposition to the amendment from the gentleman to kill the space station. I think it'd be a terrible mistake for this Congress to vote to terminate the space station, and I'm as strong a supporter, Madam Chairman and members, of fiscal responsibility as the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lewis, has stated. There are many of us here who are not strangers to fiscal responsibility in this House, and in H.R. 2200, we've cut the space station by $4 billion over the next 5 years. And the House has just adopted an across-the-board cut to the NASA budget that cuts an additional $250 million. We've shown that we can cut back, but I think we also must show that we're not going to cut out and lose a dream that many youngsters, many school children have, many old people who are wasting away in cancer wards with no hope for the future. The space station to these people, to these youngsters, and to the elderly means hope. And that's what the space station is to us. Can you put a price, really, on hope? And I disagree with the gentleman from Massachusetts when he says this country does not want to be number one anymore. I disagree with anyone when they say that we shouldn't be geopolitically strong and have a leadership position in the eyes of the world. I think I certainly want to also appeal to the new members of this organization, the 110 freshmen who will really be the beneficiaries of the gifts of discovery that we might find that might be spawned through the space station. This Congress in 1971, Madam Chairman, created and passed the National Cancer Institute. And the breakthroughs since that time, the MRI, CAT scan, the many other findings along the way, discoveries that come on the heels of discovery, have benefited millions and millions of people, and this Congress, in its wisdom, has supported that institute. It's grown by leaps and bounds, and the discoveries and breakthroughs and the alleviation of pain and suffering has followed. Mr. Roemer made a series of arguments opposing the space station. Upon close examination, let us look and see whether or not they really and truly hold up. The reality is that the space station in H.R. 2200, introduced by Chairman Brown and others of us before the President decided on A, B, or C options, and then the decision made by the thinking members of this Congress that we're going to support that the President sends over here. If it is a space station, we're going to give him the support. We endorsed the President's cuts in cost in the space station. He cut those costs by over $4 billion over the next 5 years. We cut in committee $226 million. The President cut in the out years $18 billion. These are cuts. This is real money. Just 20 minutes ago, this Congress cut $250 million out. So no one can take the position that we've not addressed this and not made the cuts. Moreover, the total cost for the development and 10 years of operation of the space station will be about $47 billion. Not $120 billion that they've been asserting. In addition, that $47 billion includes $11 billion that we've already spent. And of course that should be taken into calculation, but that's not to be added to hold up for the expenditures that we may have in the future. As recently as yesterday, the Space Subcommittee, which I chair, had received testimony from a group of 9 very renowned doctors and medical researchers, including, Madam Chairman, the world-famous Dr. Michael DeBakey, who told us how important the space shuttle is now to the medical research and drug research that these scientists are conducting, and how much more important the space station will be to the research they hope to be able to do in the future. Dr. DeBakey, aged Dr. DeBakey, made calls on members here. A man who came to Washington, gave up his time and his week to support this space station, a man whom people cross oceans to get 30 minutes with, came to this body and gave of his time and his information. These scientists explained that the microgravity environment that's provided on the space station It's allowing them to do very important research on life-threatening diseases like cancer and AIDS, and that cannot be duplicated on Earth. They also told us that the shuttle is allowing them to conduct experiments on revolutionary new drugs that can't be done on Earth because of the presence of gravity. These scientists went on to explain that the space station will be even more important to their future research and experimentation efforts than the space shuttle is to their current endeavors. And this is, of course, because of the extended volume of research, duration of research, and more advanced research tools and equipment that can be accommodated on board the space station. I believe that history has shown again and again that when a new line of research, scientific research is pursued, or when a revolutionary new scientific research tool becomes available, the results and the benefits that eventually flow to society are immense. Sometimes it takes even decades for these benefits to fully mature and become widely recognized. But history has shown that these benefits always come. History can also reveal that there is no return when there's no meaningful research. So, Madam Chairman, I certainly recommend and point out many different additional investments that are important to us, none more important than that of the youth. The imaginations of the current generations of children in this country have been captivated by many movies, Star Trek and other movies. But this is just science fiction. The space station, on the other hand, is something real that they can feel, that they can see. It's something tangible that our children can dream about and then aim their educations and their careers toward. So I appeal to you to help keep these dreams alive. In addition to the dreams for our children, I think we also have to be conscientious about the promises that we make to other nations. Chairman Brown has very well covered that. Accordingly, Madam Chairman, for these reasons, for many more, I think it's very important, and I think it's imperative this Congress defeat any and all amendments to terminate the space station. I just don't think the American people would tolerate it, and I think if you want to have cards, letters, radiograms, and people in person converging on this city, converging on your district, kill something that's as meaningful to them as a space station. I yield back the balance of my time.
The Chairman yield?
I do yield.
First of all, I would like to salute the distinguished chairman for the open rule that he's brought to the floor, but also the openness that he has had in the committee to debate both sides of this issue. Secondly, I would just like to say that I voted against the across-the-board cut that opened debate on this bill because I think that NASA needs good money for research. I'm not against NASA. I'm not against good programs that are working and across-the-board cuts. I think we should hone in and target in on those programs that aren't. And thirdly, on the distinguished Dr. DeBakey's oral testimony yesterday, he never mentioned space station in his oral testimony. He said we do need to invest in good research in NASA, but never said in his oral testimony that space station was part of that.
I thank the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think the gentleman's right. 99% of the time, we'll just disagree with him on this amendment. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Shays.
The gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to first thank Dick Zimmer and Tim Roemer for the excellent job they've done in presenting a very real and helpful case for our decision on whether or not to fund the new space station. I don't know which version, but I know there have been many. And I know that all of us here want to do the right thing. But in the process of thinking of the right thing, I think of these things. I think of my daughter, who's 13 years old, who has seen in her lifetime the national debt go up 5-fold, from over $800 billion to over $4,000 billion in her lifetime. I think of my daughter, who sees us here debating whether we should spend $47 billion, but knows that the deficit this year alone is over $400 billion. Now, I don't know who is mostly the blame for our deficits. Is it Congress or the White House? Is it the White House that never has submitted a balanced budget amendment in the last 13 years? Is it the President? Or is it Congress who never gives back the President a balanced budget? Or is it the President who never seems to past presidents, this one has a record still to unfold, who has never vetoed these unbalanced budgets. I don't know who's mostly to blame. Maybe we all have a role to play. In fact, I don't think maybe, I know we do. But I think of that in deriving at a decision, and I think that in this chamber there are more than 50% who would vote for a balanced budget amendment. They would vote for a balanced budget amendment, and I will too, but to vote for a balanced budget amendment means that we then have to balance the budget. It means we have to cut out programs that we may think are wasteful and fraudulent, or programs that we like which we just can't fund. I put the space station in that category. I don't think we can arrive at coming close to a balanced budget amendment, even with all the new taxes we may contemplate, without making some cuts in programs we may like to see. So it comes to what I see now. The net deficit, without presidential action, without the president's plan, will go up $1.5 trillion. The net. With presidential action, it will still go up $1 trillion. That's the net, because we subtract out Social Security. If we don't subtract out Social Security, the national debt will go up in 5 years $2.1 trillion. With the president's program to cut spending and raise taxes, primarily raise taxes and, as I view it, it will still go up $1.7 trillion. So on top of the $4 trillion, we're going to see $1.7 trillion. So that's what's in my mind as I debate this bill. And I think Tom Tolles, a cartoonist who had a cartoon in the Buffalo News, I think he's Syndicate and it may be in other areas, I think he captures this debate for me. In the beginning of his cartoon, he has a question box, and he says, so is there any good news coming out of Washington about plans to cut the deficit? And then you see an Uncle Sam, a very small Uncle Sam with a hatchet, and you see a pretty large space Porky, the missionless 30 billion manned space station. Well, he really was off 17 billion. So I guess we would change the cartoon to have 47 billion. This is Space Porky. That's what I think I'm debating today. And I see a little Uncle Sam with a hatchet trying to cut spending. I don't know how we get to a balanced budget amendment unless we eliminate some programs. This is a program that we need to eliminate.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes. Without objection.
Madam Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment this afternoon and in strong support of space station freedom. I rise as the most fiscally responsible member of the House of Representatives, according to the National Taxpayers Union last year. And I also rise as a representative of a state that does not do much NASA business. So there's no pork barrel spending for NASA in the state of Wisconsin. But I'm taking the position that I am today because this is a vote on whether or not to continue a manned space program that has put America on the cutting edge of technology since its inception in 1957. All one needs to do is to look at the spin-offs from NASA activities and how they have improved our lives and even extended those lives. Without the manned space program, we would not have had a revolution in telecommunications, which has made long-distance telephone calls dirt cheap. We would not have had the development of medications that have eased pain and extended the life expectancy of people in this country and around the world. We would not have seen new materials develop, whether it be Velcro or materials that could be used for artificial hips and joints. And we would not have been able to see things that have made our lives easier, such as sunglass lenses that many people now use that can more effectively diffuse the rays of radiation from the sun. The space station holds the potential of keeping America on the cutting edge of technology. And if we back away from this program now, the technology which America has developed will be developed by those who do go into space. The Russians, the Europeans, and the Japanese, who will be there regardless of what this Congress decides today. And I don't want to see that happen. As was mentioned earlier, There was a hearing at the Space Subcommittee yesterday with an all-star panel of witnesses led by Dr. Michael DeBakey. Just in the area of medical research alone, there was evidence placed on the table at that hearing to show that we need microgravity research in order to develop a permanent heart ventricle valve, in order to understand better the human body's immunology, which is the key to curing cancer and AIDS. And all kinds of other things will flow from the permanent microgravity research which can be done only on Space Station Freedom. During the last presidential campaign, we heard an awful lot about thinking about tomorrow. This is a vote, Madam Chairman, that will show who's thinking about tomorrow and who isn't. Vote no on the Roemer-Zimmer amendment to keep America on the cutting edge of technological research. Vote no on the Roemer-Zimmer amendment to keep our technology being what makes American business best and reduces our balance of payments deficit as far as possible. Vote no to keep America #1 in space so the rest of the world can follow our lead rather than the United States of America following somebody else's lead. I yield the balance of my time back to the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
I would yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from New York, who, as a freshman, has been very helpful on this matter.
For how much time is the gentleman yielding?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Okay. Madam Chairwoman.
Madam Chairman, and I'll yield 2 minutes of my time for a total of 4 minutes.
Thank you. The gentlewoman is recognized from New York is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chairwoman, today Congress has an opportunity to make serious budget cuts. The Roemer-Zimmer amendment would save the American taxpayer over $2 billion in the next year alone and as much as $12 billion over the next 5 years. We cannot afford to build the biggest pork barrel ever shot into space. We have tough, serious choices to make. Our compact with the American people requires Congress to make significant spending cuts in return for increased taxes. But before the increased taxes on Social Security recipients or cut Medicare, we must eliminate those big-ticket scientific boondoggles that return very little on their massive investment. When Congress first approved the space station, it was estimated that the program would cost $8 billion to complete. Today, even with the scaled-down design, NASA estimates completion of the project will cost over $27 billion, while the General Accounting Office estimates are much higher than that. And this does not include the nearly $60 billion it will cost to operate the station after 1999, bringing the total estimated cost to over $80 billion. Expensive national projects may add to our prestige and may even serve science. However, none should take precedence over human needs. Many supporters of the space station hail the microgravity research as a key element of the program. Yet in March 1991, Dr. Alan Bromley, President Bush's top science aide, wrote a lengthy summary of the space station's merits for then Vice President Quayle. Dr. Bromley wrote, and I quote, "Neither the commercial processes nor the scientific merit of the microgravity experiments come close to justifying the cost and effort required to build, deploy, and operate the station. In fact, for many scientists, this program can be summarized in 3 simple words: waste in space." So we're going to spend over $80 billion to build a Red Roof Inn in outer space for 4 astronauts, when we will spend only a fraction of that amount to house thousands of homeless families here on Earth. Let me repeat that: billions for housing in space and only millions for affordable housing in the nation. Some might argue that the space station is an important jobs program. The truth is that every job the space station will create costs $100,000. And this doesn't even begin to address the high-tech jobs that are lost because NASA cancels, postpones or squeezes other worthy scientific projects. We must be able to cut programs like the space station that the nation does not need and can no longer afford. Continued funding for these projects will help ensure that we continue to drown in debt. Madam Speaker, Madam Chairwoman, let's concentrate on the real priorities of this country, putting people, not pork, first. I urge my colleagues to vote for the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Madam Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Kansas, member of the committee, Dan Glickman, Chairman of Intelligence Committee.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Roemer is one of the most effective members here. He almost had me convinced. And in fact, he makes a lot of good arguments. But I'd have to tell you, this is one of these issues that I slept over this weekend and decided to use my best instincts rather than looking at the politics or the jobs issue. And basically, I came down on the fact that the space station has had a lot of serious trouble in terms of development. NASA has done at times a miserable job of managing. But the fact is that America is the leader of the post-World War II world. We are the leader in technology and productivity and manufacturing and in jobs. And yes, in clout as well. And that allows us to influence human rights and democracy and market reforms everywhere in the world. And we are being directly and effectively challenged by Japan, by Europe, by Russia, and a whole new group of competitors who are actively engaged in an effort to push us out of our leadership role wherever it exists, in space, in manufacturing, and technology. Now, while this program has not been perfect, and the redesign has at times been a bit sloppy, to kill it now is to accept the fact that we are relegating our position to a secondary status in the area of space exploration, and to accept the fact that other countries will take the lead in the future. How will we feel when Japan and Europe and Russia are the only ones doing this and not us? How will our children feel when this happens? I think it's a pretty sad state of affairs when America is so withers and so internalizes that we have lost the role of ourselves as being a great leader. And it is a jobs issue. It's not just jobs to create the station, but it's a whole lot of spin-off jobs. And let me tell my friends this. Defense spending is coming down radically. And if you look at America's industrial base right now, much of it is defense-related. Much of it is. Much of the spin-off is defense-related. Our new airplanes are defense-related. Our new automobiles, technology, composites, all that was largely done as part of the defense budget. The space program is really one of the few things we have left going to keep that technological base in light of that defense spending coming down. Let me finally mention the issue of budget, and it is an important issue. But I would point out that the real culprit in our budget problem is not the space station. It's entitlement programs. In 1965, we spent $33 billion on all entitlement programs, from pensions to health care. That was 5% of our GNP. This year, we're spending $770 billion on entitlement programs. That's 25 times they've grown in the last 30 years or so, or about 12.5% of our GDP. I'm just saying to you, in perspective, the real culprit on deficits is not the space station, while we need to look at waste in this area as well. And I hope my colleagues will not reject it for that reason.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I rise in support of the bipartisan Roemer-Zimmer amendment to cut funds for the space station. I would agree with some that this project would be nice to have, but we simply cannot afford it, not with a $300 billion annual deficit. The GAO, General Accounting Office, said recently that this project will cost $158 billion to build and operate. We can't afford that, not with a $300 billion deficit. Do you remember the old Muppet TV show, Pigs in Space? Do you remember that? Well, maybe this space station ought to be the star attraction on a congressional version of a show called Pork in Space. Even Elmer Fudd, I think, could have a comeback. A few weeks ago, one of my largest newspapers in southwestern Michigan editorialized this program as Can the Space Station. That's exactly what this project is. Pork in a can. Maybe some would even call it spam. But whatever you call it, it's a pig in a poke. Madam Chairman, let's wake up and smell the bacon. It's time to kill this pork project and bring a little fiscal sanity back into our budget recipe. The time is now for Congress to stand up, make a tough choice, and say no to a program that we simply cannot afford. With a $300 billion deficit, it's time to change business as usual, and I would urge all of my colleagues to vote yes on this wonderful bipartisan amendment to cut spending first. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Washington, Mrs. Dunn.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to the amendment and want to underscore my support for the space station and for the superb leadership provided by George Brown, chairman of the committee, and ranking member Bob Walker. There are many reasons to support the space station, and we'll hear many of them today on the floor. But to me, one of the singular reasons for a space station and the continuation of a strong manned space program is the unique scientific and medical research that can be done only in the microgravity environment of space. The space station, Madam Chairman, offers a one-of-a-kind environment for this critical health work. While microgravity research is being conducted even now on the shuttle, the long-term research necessary, especially for the growth of cancer tissue, will be conducted in the space station. Madam Chairman, projections from the American Cancer Society indicate that 1 in every 3 people alive today will be diagnosed with some form of cancer. That means that about 85 million Americans now living will eventually have cancer. And projections from the American Cancer Society indicate that by age 85, 1 in every 9 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. And 1 of every 65 women will develop ovarian cancer. And it's important to note, Madam Chairman, that ovarian cancer survival rates today are no better than they were some 30 years ago. 1 in 9, Madam Chairman. Look around this chamber. You understand this problem. Those aren't very good odds for the 48 women now serving in the House of Representatives. They're not very good odds for our mothers, our daughters, our friends, and other family members either. The little research that has been done recently in the life sciences and microgravity fields has been extremely beneficial to women. One of the reasons for this recent focus is that women now comprise almost 25% of our astronauts. There are many people in my life, Madam Chairman, men and women who have been touched by cancer. I would like to think that my 2 sons and their future wives and daughters will be able to benefit from the decisions we make here today. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to extend my remarks by having a letter underscoring the importance of NASA's microgravity research on women's health care issues inserted into the record.
That will be covered under general leave in the House, the request that the gentlewoman made about putting a letter in the record will be covered under general leave in the House. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Chair, I would yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Durbin, to talk about some of the health care claims.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. With all due respect to the previous speaker, I think those listening to this debate can understand the desperation of the supporters of the space station when they try to convince the American people that putting this station in space is going to find a cure for cancer or a cure for AIDS. Those arguments have been made on the floor of the House, and I think they betray the problem with this program. This program has been searching for a mission. If you want to find a cure for cancer or a cure for AIDS, turn to the medical experts in America. I held a hearing last year and asked them, is the space station where we should go? They said, no, Congressman, stay right here on Earth, because we can't find enough money in this federal budget to fund the National Institutes of Health. This year we'll put about $10 billion into all of the federal research to find cures for heart disease and cancer and AIDS and Alzheimer's. And still, we will only be funding 1 out of every 4 approved research grants at NIH. To suggest that we should now turn around and spend $150 billion on the space station to cure cancer is ludicrous. If you want to think about tomorrow, as one of my colleagues said, in reference to supporting the space station, I'd like to join you in thinking about tomorrow. The tomorrow I think about is a child in America who finally has a cure for AIDS. The tomorrow I think about is the tomorrow with men and women who find cures for heart disease and cancer by investing here on Earth. Some people in this world and this nation need a liftoff and brave astronauts to believe that they're embarking on a great national adventure. I don't need that. I think America can continue to be a leader in medical research. I think we can find cures for diseases, but let's focus on curing the problems right here on Earth. The President can put a new set of tires and a new paint job on the space station. It still won't fly. Let's stick with curing those problems right here at home.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Chairman, at the proper time, we'll enter into the record a statement by another noted physician, Dr. Michael DeBakey, who will address the words of Mr. Durbin. At this time...
Gentleman's request will be handled under general leave in the full House.
At this time, Madam Chairman, I recognize the gentlelady from California and a very valued member of our committee, Anna Eshoo.
The chair is pleased
for 2 minutes.
The chair is pleased to recognize the gentlewoman for California for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chairwoman, I am pleased to be here today to stand in opposition to the amendment that has been offered. 32 years ago, President Kennedy offered a bold vision for our nation, and he challenged an agency to come up with a mission that would place a man on the moon. Americans applauded that. And that young president and his bold vision produced something for this nation and placed us first in space exploration and all that has come from it. Today, another young president speaks to a vision and a boldness, because it takes boldness today to reshape an agency as well as its plan. And that's why I support it. The benefits are clear. Telecommunications, health benefits. This is the basic physiological research project in the nation. Can we afford to give up an international partnership, the only international partnership that this country has been engaged in other than the allies that we have pulled together in war? That's how critical this is. What I would like to end my comments with is, it is very important for all of us to know the price of everything, but it should not be said that we value nothing. It is our responsibility to place the price tags on things, but also to state the value. This is a reshaped plan in terms of dollars, and it speaks to a vision of that young president of over 3 decades ago, and I'm proud to rise in support or in opposition of the amendment and support of the space station. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Anyone seek recognition? Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Makeley, for 3 minutes.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Chairwoman, I rise today in support of the Roemer-Zimmer amendment to terminate the space station program. Make no mistake about it. I have joined the millions of Americans who, for the past 30 years, have considered this a noble enterprise to explore outer space. And I have enjoyed the benefits of some of the scientific achievements which have accompanied this exploration. And while I think that we should continue the scientific exploration of outer space, it must be done within our financial means. We responded to Sputnik by putting a man on the moon. In 1969, I was an exchange student in Stockholm, Sweden, and I remember in the wee hours of the morning the pride that I felt as Neil Armstrong put his footprint on the moon as a giant step for mankind. But today is not 1969. In 1969, we did not have a $4 trillion debt. We did not have a yearly budget deficit of $300 billion. And we were not paying more to service our debt than any other segment of our budget outlays. This is not about dreams for the future. This is about hard financial choices for today so that the future will be economically sound. Recently, a newspaper article indicated that at least 30% of the 17,000 people who are working on this project could in fact be released as excess. In the past, I have voted for the space station because I felt that some of the limited scientific medical evidence could support that. But not today. Not today, as we tell the American people that we have a deficit that must come under control. The $16.5 billion, even in this slimmed-down version, is too much money for the limited scientific medical evidence that we may achieve by putting this space station in space. When I ran for Congress, I had a small piglet. I called him Lester Pork. And I thought about Lester as I was thinking about this project. And I was thinking what Lester would say. We called him Les Pork. And I think if Lester was here today, he would wink and he would oink, and he would say, this is the stuff that pigs are made of. With all our physical problems today, we cannot afford this. It has value for some medical and technological achievement. It will not solve our cancer problems. It will not solve the AIDS problems of this nation, but it will add to our deficit. I would urge my colleagues to think of the future when they vote and to support the termination of the space station. Thank you. Yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Lewis.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, my ranking colleague from Pennsylvania. I want to express my deep appreciation for the bipartisan effort that has been put forth here today on the part of the chairman from California, George Brown, and my colleague, Bob Walker. One of my earliest memories reflecting upon our effort in space takes me to my bathroom early in the morning in California several years ago. I was listening to the television set through a side ear as I was shaving, getting ready to go to work. At the last moments, walking down the hall, I looked down in my family room and saw my youngest boys, twin sons, as they watched our first blast-off, sending a man into outer space. As I listened to their conversation, talking about the apogee and the epigee of that flight, kind of like it was this morning's cornflakes, it struck me that, indeed, they knew more about the future than many of us are willing to admit in terms of America's significant commitment to our effort in space. Those young people today are young college professors looking to a new horizon for America's future in space. And indeed, you and I should recognize that America's history is a reflection of pioneer spirit that makes a difference for tomorrow, reflected in the will of those young people as they look out to a tomorrow that is their own horizon for America's future. And Mr. Walker, I'd love to revise and extend my remarks so I can get my notes back and remember what I said.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The gentleman from Indiana.
I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey and a valuable member of the Science Committee, Mr. Klein.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I want to commend Mr. Roemer and Mr. Zimmer for their leadership on the amendment and Chairman Brown for his leadership on the committee. And as a member of the Science Committee, I'm totally committed to continue the American leadership in science. But I'm also committed to reducing our budget deficit and cutting government spending. That kind of sound fiscal policy demands that we make hard choices, that we establish our priorities and eliminate low-priority items. And when I weigh the space station against such compelling national needs as health care reform, more police on the streets to fight crime, and more quality, affordable housing, the space station falls short on any reasonable priority scale. And in the area of scientific research, there are far more urgent programs to which we should devote our resources. For example, developing new technologies to create new industries and new jobs, developing environmentally sound and cost-effective manufacturing techniques, research in the area of environmental protection, and yes, medical research here on Earth, and development of a national information infrastructure. I ask you, how can we go home to our constituents and justify spending these vast sums of money on a project when 6 of its 8 scientific missions have been abandoned, and when so much of the money has been dissipated in administrative costs? As much as I value most of NASA's work and support the overall space program, it has become apparent that the space station Freedom is a project that is lost in space. Madam Speaker, I call upon my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to exercise sound fiscal judgment and support the Roemer Amendment to bring to an end the throwing good money after bad.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Madam Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Tennessee who chairs the Energy Subcommittee, Ms. Marilyn Lloyd.
Thank the gentleman for
Gentlewoman
yielding. Madam
from
Speaker, Chair, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without
I rise
objection.
in opposition to the Roemer Amendment and strong support of the space station. Again, this year we do have a great deal of controversy over this legislation, and specifically space station freedom. However, we must all realize the benefits and the possibilities that these projects hold out for every American. Maintaining a strong industrial base that incorporates the most advanced technologies and materials is very vital to our economic stability and our growth. The space station should be seen as a contributor to our economic future and a giant leap forward in our technological and our scientific capabilities. You know, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, we're not alone in our endeavor. The international community looks to us as the leader. And should we take the drastic step of cutting off our involvement with the space station, we would jeopardize our standing in the international community. And we know that Japan, that Canada, that the European community all will have a permanent presence in space. And I'd like to comment on the comments by the gentlelady from Washington. I'm one of those 9 that did develop cancer, and I'm a lucky one because I'm a survivor. But I certainly hope that we can look forward at the unique possibilities of a microgravity lab and a space station. I hope that we can have the longer missions to make this possible. It is so important to establish an outpost in space. So I would encourage all of my colleagues to support the Space Station Freedom Program and the many other worthy projects that are encompassed in this legislation, not only for our future, but future generations of Americans.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Smith.
2 minutes?
3.
3 minutes. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. You know, across the chambers in this Capitol, the Senate is now talking about a budget proposal that will increase the public debt of this country by $1 billion a day. That overspending hurts our chances for a good future. It seems to me that decisions on whether or not to vote for budget cuts, such as the space station, should be predicated on our overall goals to help our economic recovery and stop a decline in the standard of living of Americans. In this regard, space station freedom is indefensible and is fiscally unjustified. The money could more appropriately be spent encouraging science and research projects to develop new technologies for American companies in order to increase our productivity and our competitive situation in a world market. Some speakers have suggested we could get a lot of research information from the space station. The fact is that we've already signed away America's exclusive rights to this information to other countries. We signed intergovernmental agreements that would share research findings with Japan and other countries so that we can't take the advantage of that kind of competitive edge that we might otherwise have. Ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to put billions and billions of dollars into research, then I suggest it's in America's best interest to fund the kind of research efforts that could be best used by Americans in America to improve our competitive edge, to improve our economy, and increase the number of good jobs that are available. Borrowing money to spend on this project is a luxury we cannot afford. Each year that we sink more money into this pie-in-the-sky boondoggle, makes it that much more difficult to reconsider. Let's put this project on hold while it's still in the planning stages and until this country deals with our most important priorities. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Roerbach.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
First of all, I'd like to salute the leadership of our chairman, Chairman Brown, and the cooperation that we've had between Republicans and Democrats on this vital technological project. I rise in opposition to the amendment, while at the same time not only saluting the ranking member and my chairman, but also saluting Mr. Roemer and Mr. Zimmer, who provided leadership in their own way and for the things that they believe in about the space station. Their constructive criticism has actually helped improve this program. Budgets have been cut and costs have been brought under control. The space station now is on track, and its potential is greater now than what it was, perhaps because of those people who are providing loyal opposition to the project itself. It's actually much greater in its potential than when it was approved by Ronald Reagan back in 1984. Unlike then, we now have the option of working with our former enemies in space. When Ronald Reagan first approved this station, it was in the height of the Cold War. Today, we are looking at this station as an example of cooperation for all mankind. Our former enemies can work with us in order to build a celestial beacon of cooperation, of peace, of progress, and yes, of freedom. In gravity-free research, we can find things that we couldn't find on Earth. Yes, we've heard about that. Medical achievements, scientific investigations and achievements that are impossible on Earth. But that's not the main reason why we're supporting space station freedom. Space station freedom represents humankind's potential. It represents not only scientific and not only medical research, but it symbolizes, as our chairman said, an outpost for mankind, a way station for mankind's future. I see the space station as serving as a way station for moon colonization and commercial endeavors in space that will enrich our country and all of humankind. And thus I would ask for the support of space station freedom and ask my colleagues to vote against this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Chair, I would yield 2 minutes to the distinguished freshman from Wisconsin, Mr. Barrett.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I love our space program. As a child, I watched American astronauts walk in space and land on the moon. These were incredible moments that stirred patriotic feelings among all of us. Americans love the space program because we are a nation of dreamers who think that nothing is beyond our grasp, that nothing is too difficult for us to accomplish. Unfortunately, in the case of the space station, our dreams far exceed what our budget can afford. Just as parents have to tell their children that the family can't afford that trip to Disney World or that Nintendo game, we as a nation must admit that the money just isn't there. Now is the time to do that with the space station. And it is time for the members of Congress who claim they want to cut federal spending to actually do it. There are wasteful programs that simply must be cut. The space station is at the top of the list. The National Taxpayer Union calls the space station, quote, one of the most technologically indefensible and fiscally unjustifiable government ventures. If you're for cutting spending, this is where you should start. This amendment is not a vote against the space program. It is not a vote against space research. The fact of the matter is that the space station funding is crowding out other more important research funding. The space program will flourish without the space station. It is time to tell the dreamers that we just can't keep throwing money into the black hole that is the space station. It's wonderful to dream, but we can't keep paying for our dreams with our children's money. This vote is a vote on the deficit. If you vote for the amendment, you're voting to cut the deficit that our children will be forced to pay by over $10 billion. Rather than leaving them with a fiscal nightmare, let's do the right thing and approve the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Chairman, I yield the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Harold Volkmer, 2 minutes. Mr. Volkmer is former chairman of Space who spawned the space station legislation in the early 80s.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
As unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Chairman, I rise today in full support of H.R. 2200, the National Aeronautics Space Administration Authorization Act, and in strong opposition to the amendment offered by Mr. Roemer and Mr. Zimmer to terminate the space station Freedom. You know, less than 3 decades ago, Neil Armstrong captured the hearts and imaginations of the young and the old around the world as he took those first few steps on the moon. The words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," still resonate with the sound of American achievement that has never been equaled. It is now the dawn of a new era where international cooperation in the final frontier will serve all mankind and planet Earth. The development of space station is already pushing the envelope on international cooperation. NASA's flagship program will be an international research laboratory where partnerships with Canada, Japan, and the European Space Agency will bind together a common desire to explore and advance science and technology. Ladies and gentlemen, what would it have been if about 501 years ago, Isabel and Ferdinand had said, "We don't have the money. We can't afford, Christopher, for you to try and find a new route"? What would this world be today? What are we saying today when we defeat, or if the defeat of the space station is accomplished by the 2 gentlemen, the gentleman from Indiana and the gentleman from New Jersey? You are forever foreclosing man transferring back to the moon. Man habitat on the moon. Man going to Mars? Yes, it's possible. Without the space station? Never happened. Not going to happen, folks. What vision have you of our space? It's a lot different than my vision. My vision of the future in space includes man going to Mars and man living on the moon, not just here on Earth.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
We have a space station already. A lot of people haven't recognized it, but you're sitting on it right now. It's the Earth. And we've had a lot of frontiers on this Earth. But surely some of you, like I, can look beyond the Earth and see new frontiers. And this country, this mighty nation, is still a #1 nation. And to stand in this well and to say that we can no longer afford to have visions, we can no longer as a people afford to look to the future, to dream a little bit. We can no longer afford to do what John F. Kennedy did. We can no longer afford vision nor dreams. We can no longer afford the future. All we have is what we have now as far as space is concerned. The only space station without freedom that you're ever going to have is the one you have now, and that's the Earth.
Time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. B. Ryder.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection.
Madam Chairman, my colleagues, spending money on the space station will probably assure we'll never get to Mars. As a strong NASA supporter and a science and space aficionado, this member rises in opposition to funding the space station in support of the amendment. At a time of huge budget deficits, unmet domestic needs, and more appropriate NASA priorities, construction and operating costs of this space station are projected to reach an incredible and unacceptable $120 billion. Already $8.5 billion have been poured into this black hole. Yet the tangible benefits of this project are quite unpredictable, and recent discoveries have revealed countless arguments against or obstacles to the project's successful completion and operation of originally described missions. Too many missions were simply dreamed up to justify the space station instead of a legitimate focus first on legitimate missions that are justifiable. Madam Chairman, we need to face the fact that many of the proposed missions and research applications of freedom have been cut or rejected. At the same time, costs have increased dramatically. Nevertheless, supporters of grandiose science projects like the superconducting super collider and the space station criticize opponents for abandoning science. Nothing could be further than the truth. In fact, the opponents of these grandiose projects are probably America's science protectors. Instead of focusing attention on just a few hugely expensive projects with little or no guaranteed benefits, we prefer to place American science dollars on numerous innovative projects with higher prospects for far greater returns for money spent. Madam Chairman, this member urges his colleagues to support the Zimmer-Roemer amendment to delete funds. It's a glamorous, cost-ineffective project this nation and American basic and applied science cannot afford and should not undertake. The space station is a well-intended, exciting project that's now clearly a costly boondoggle, which is primarily supported for cost-ineffective, parochial, geographic, and industrial reasons. Madam Chairman, the proponents' arguments on behalf of the space station are well-intended, but I am intellectually offended by the bogus and sometimes far-fetched scientific and medical facts that have been given to the proponents. We should all be offended by them. If your constituents had the facts and the intellect we have been given, they would overwhelmingly say, this is the wrong scientific investment for their tax dollars. Madam Chairman, I urge my colleagues to load and fire the silver bullet by voting for the Zimmer-Roemer amendment to kill this gluttonous turkey now. It's starving too many truly valuable research and science projects. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Hoke.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I rise today in strong opposition to this amendment and in strong support for the space station. And I want to just bring 2 points to bear on this debate. First of all, I think the members of this body need to know that a vote for this amendment, that is a vote to kill space station, is nothing less than a vote to kill manned and womaned exploration of space by the United States of America for the foreseeable future. Let's make no mistake about that. This is not a vote for a substitute. This isn't a vote for some other kind of manned exploration. This will be the end of our manned, womaned exploration of space for decades to the future. And what will happen as a result of that is that we will also abdicate our world leadership with respect to the technologies that drive manned space exploration, with respect to the private sector spin-offs in industry that come from that technology, with respect to the intellectual leadership, the exploratory leadership, and indeed the spiritual leadership that comes from being the premier pioneer of manned and woman space voyages. But I'd like to make another point that I haven't heard made this afternoon, and that has to do with the fact that the United States has already entered into express commitments of our word as a nation with the Japanese, the Canadians, and a consortium of European nations with respect to space station. As a result of these commitments, those countries have already spent $3.6 billion and are committed to a total amount of expenditure of over $8 billion. Even if we unilaterally shut this program down tomorrow, it's too late for those countries to keep from spending the money that they've already wasted in that event and that will be required to shut down. Madam Chairman, if we in this Congress repudiate America's commitment to our allies around the world, we do 2 very damaging things. First of all, we cause them to waste extraordinary amounts of money. And second, and more disturbing to me, is that we've reneged on a solemn commitment. We've broken our word as a nation. And as the prophet said, as you sow, so shall you reap. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Chair, I would yield 1 minute to another distinguished freshman, Pat Danner from the state of Missouri.
The gentlewoman from Missouri is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection.
Madam Chairman, Will Rogers, the well-known humorist, once said, "I don't make jokes, I just watch government and report the facts, and I've never found it necessary to exaggerate." Or it might even be, as magician David Copperfield might say, sleight of hand, what you see is not necessarily what you get. The space station was supposed to have been in operation by 1994, next year. We didn't get it. Now the projection is somewhere in the neighborhood of the year 2000. It was supposed to have cost $8 billion. Now we're hearing figures ranging up to 40, 50, 60, 70 billion dollars. Not only will it greatly exceed the projected cost, but it has been redesigned 5 times in 9 years. With these redesigns have come a reduction in the scientific goals of the project. We're now at a point where the scientific mission of the space station is questionable. In these tight budgetary times in which there are discussions of cutting such important programs as Medicare and Medicaid, can we justify to the American people a project which has few scientific merits and will, at conservative estimates, cost $40 billion or more? I have heard my people say we need to cut spending. I believe that all Americans feel that we need to cut unnecessary spending.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Madam Chairman, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Alabama, Bud Kramer, whose district houses a Marshall Space Center.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the chairman of the Space Subcommittee. First of all, I want to congratulate the chairman of the full committee and the chairman of the Space Subcommittee. We've hammered out some tough issues through the committee hearings and have held NASA's feet to the fire on both sides of the aisle. This is a bill, NASA's reauthorization bill, that forges the space station program, so I rise in strong opposition to the Roemer-Zimmer amendment here. I've listened to these arguments, and I want to make my pitch to the members of this body, and particularly the new members. Did we just wake up today and figure that we have a deficit now, and now we want to take care of this program? Do we wake up today and decide that the house that's been built and is 3/4 built is a house that we cannot afford, and consequently we need to walk away from it? That's not the way that my constituents want to see government work, and that's not a part of a process that I want to be a part of at any rate. The arguments that are being made today in support of this amendment to kill Space Station are just years too late. It's irresponsible for this government to walk away, or for us to leave NASA holding an $8 billion bag here. Now, other proponents of this amendment have talked about the spurious arguments that those space station supporters have made about medical issues. And I wish those proponents could have been present this morning at a breakfast that our colleague from Texas, Mike Andrews, sponsored, where we heard from physicians from Texas that talked about the incredible process that they're involved in, even with other countries, with the Japanese and the French, using the technology from the aerospace program, using it to make surgery more effective, using it for transplant issues, using it in incredible ways that would allow us to see cures down the line, that would see breakthroughs that benefit people all over this country. This is a people issue. It is too late to walk away from this space station program. It is the responsible thing to do. Let's quit whining here. Let's look at what we're really doing. Let's not lose this battle to the bigger political issue of the deficit. Let's be responsible, and let's support this program. So I urge my colleagues to vote against the Roemer Amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, member of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Porter.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Chair, I ask leave to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I support the Roemer-Zimmer amendment. I'm not an expert, Madam Chair, in science, but I know what we can afford, and I know that we cannot afford a manned space station. It will have to be deferred until we can put our fiscal house in order. Earlier, the gentleman from Wisconsin said that wonderful technologies were developed through the manned space program, and I'm sure that this is true. And he said there would be potentially wonderful technologies developed from the space station, and I'm sure this is also true, Madam Chairman. But he also said that if we didn't proceed, Japan or Europe or Russia would be there first, And I'm sure that this is not true. In fact, it is ludicrous. Each of those economies are in deep trouble, more even than our own. And if we shut down, they shut down. And if we are going to compete in this way, it will not be a race into space. It will be a race into bankruptcy. Others have said that NASA is the choice to solve AIDS and cancer, to find cures for these terrible diseases. This administration, in fact, is willing to put money into a manned space station and the SSC, and yet, if you look at their budget carefully, they have suggested to us a 1% increase in the National Institutes of Health, the place where we will find the cures for AIDS and cancer and diabetes. That is bad prioritizing, Madam Chair. Science is going to have to contribute through NASA to bring down this deficit. Let me leave you with one statistic for your scientific consideration. An average young American, like those in the gallery today, going into the workforce and working over their entire lifetime, will have to pay during that working lifetime $200,000 in extra taxes. That's extra before any money is spent by this country on science or defense or transportation or welfare or anything else. $200,000 each if they are an average American, just to pay his or her share of the interest on the debt that we have accumulated to this point. Money that they will not have available for the purchase of a home, for the education of their children, or to start a business. Money that they will have to pay to service that terrible, huge burden of debt. This, Madam Chair, is fiscal child abuse. We are abusing the young people of this country, and it has to stop. Science has to make a contribution to doing that. Sure, we want a space station, but it will have to wait. We have higher responsibilities. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from who seeks
I'll take it if no one wants it.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Maryland.
The gentlewoman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, space station freedom will enable us to safely continue mankind's epic journey into space. As a matter of fact, it is going to be there for our young people, and we cannot blow this opportunity. Today we have heard from members, distinguished colleagues on both sides of the aisle, eloquently expounding upon the tangible benefits of space station freedom, benefits and advances to our critical technologies, global competitiveness, space exploration, economic stability, international cooperation, among others. But I'd like to just comment to my colleagues another benefit, which, although intangible, is, I believe, absolutely no less important, and that is the benefit of the space station upon our educational system and its impact on our nation's youth. Education through exploration and discovery is the very best stimulant for the young mind. And we have seen that space programs have always been an important impetus for the youth of our nation, linking their imagination and sense of adventure to the practical study of mathematics and basic sciences. Just look at history. In 1961, when President Kennedy challenged the country to embark on the Apollo moon program, he inspired thousands of students to pursue studies in science and engineering. By 1969, when Apollo's lunar lander touched down in the Sea of Tranquility, the number of science and engineering doctorates awarded in the United States had jumped 150%. The Apollo program successfully stimulated our nation's young people to learn science and engineering. And for today's youth who have no personal knowledge of the Apollo program, space station freedom has become a critical and a powerful catalyst for stimulating academic interest and enthusiasm in space and in science. The space station is capturing the imaginations of American students and helping to guide many of them to careers in technically demanding fields such as math, science, engineering, which we know are becoming increasingly important. Although it's being conceived by and constructed in our generation I want to stress the real beneficiaries of the space station's unique laboratory environment will be our future generations. We cannot let them down. I urge my colleagues to oppose the Roemer-Zimmer amendment and continue investing in our next generation by supporting the space station.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Chair, I would yield 2 minutes to a distinguished leader on the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Obey.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Chair, I don't mind funding science. I really hate like heck to fund science fiction. And in my view, it is science fiction to suggest that we really can afford to spend this kind of money on this program. In 1984, we were told it would cost about $8 billion to build this turkey, this flying turkey. It's been redesigned a number of times since then. Now, NASA says that this will cost about $57 billion over the life of the program to construct and to operate. GAO estimated the old design before the redesign would be well over $100 billion if you take all costs over the extended life of the program. Let me suggest to you that that is the equivalent to what we spend for EPA in 16 years. It's the equivalent to what we spend on child care in 100 years. It's the equivalent to what we spend at the National Cancer Institute over 50 years. It just seems to me that this package is designed more to fly politically than it is to fly scientifically. We know how the game goes. NASA comes in, they lowball the cost estimate, they get the Congress hooked on the project. Once it's being built, they say, well, gee whiz, fellas, you can't stop now because it's going to cost you money. You're going to waste all of the money you've already invested. Just like the B-1, just like the B-2, just like Star Wars, just like you name it. Program after program. That's what's happened to this Congress because we've listened to agencies we shouldn't have listened to. I would suggest to you, we simply cannot afford this flying turkey. We cannot afford, despite the fact that NASA gets this thing to fly politically by salting contracts in hundreds of congressional districts around the country so that you got people from every district calling and saying, oh, gee whiz, we get a piece of that. You just have to go ahead and support it. I suggest to you we cannot afford it. Our budget is too squeezed. We've got other priorities. I urge you to vote for this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Madam Chairman, I recognize the gentlelady from California for 2 minutes, a member of our committee.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I ask unanimous consent to
Without objection.
my remarks. Madam Chair, I rise today in opposition to the Roemer Amendment and to cast my vote for the redesigned space station, cautiously optimistic that the program will achieve several critical objectives. First, it will be on time, on budget, and on mission. Second, it will force the reorganization, even reinvention of NASA, and that reinvention will reinvigorate NASA's other important missions in science, exploration, R&D, and aeronautics. Third, a hard freeze on station funding at $10.5 billion over 5 years will free up funds for programs to develop a new modern expendable launch vehicle to compete with the Europeans, Russians, and Chinese, and leapfrog technologies such as single-stage to orbit and low-cost, high-thrust rocket engines, to reinvigorate the planetary exploration program and accelerate the frequency of Atlas Delta-class planetary probes, to undertake a series of low-cost, smaller Earth science programs enhancing our knowledge of the Earth and its immediate environment, and finally, to invest in space technology, including the Advanced X-ray Telescope, or AXAF. At a time of scarce resources and in light of NASA's dismal record on this program, it is hard to resist the arguments of my colleague from Indiana, Mr. Roemer. He is courageously defending the taxpayers' interest as he sees it. And he is right that NASA has been more captivated by Buck Rogers than by responsible control over your bucks and mine. Concern has also been raised about the safety of the scaled-down mission, though NASA responds that a well-managed redesign will, in fact, be safer than the old bloated version. But this member is persuaded that we can introduce the pros of good management to the poetry and benefits of station's mission. And I am prepared to undertake a big portion of the oversight needed to assure that this time NASA gets it right. In long personal conversations in recent days with NASA Administrator Golden, aerospace executives in my district, experts on the VEST Commission, Subcommittee Chair Mr. Hall, and Committee Chair Mr. Brown, may I request one additional minute?
Madam Chairman, we yield the gentlelady another minute.
The
Thank you.
gentlewoman is recognized for additional minute.
I conditioned my support of station on massive cutbacks in NASA overhead, centralization of program management, and full funding of NASA's other priorities. As a Space Subcommittee member, I will carefully monitor what develops and bring my own business background to bear in assessing programs. The space station will, I hope, be spared today, but a clear message will be delivered. Focus, discipline, careful planning, and sound business practice must become NASA's organizing principles, starting now. Thank you.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
The gentlewoman's statements I listened to carefully, and I must say that they represent a triumph of hope over experience. The very programs that she is thinking are going to be freed up somehow by this space station program are the very programs that have been canceled or deferred because of the insatiable appetite of the space station program. And there are no plans in the administration or in the committee to restore those programs. The Advanced X-ray study was a wonderful program that was canceled because of or delayed because of the space station program. Same with space exploration initiatives, same with the new launch vehicles and earth science initiatives. Every item that she mentioned is in trouble because of the space station. At this point, I would like to yield 3 minutes to the outstanding freshman representative from South Carolina, Mr. Inglis.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of this bipartisan amendment that would save the taxpayers a significant amount of money, and is something that we can surely do this day in a bipartisan way, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. The space station, like many other programs that we could be about, is a good program and may have significant scientific advantages. But I liken it much to the situation of a private company contemplating building a brand new headquarters and research facility. If a private corporation is in good shape, if its debts are low and its profits are high, it has an opportunity to build a brand new glass and steel and marble structure called its new headquarters with a research facility attached to it. But if that company is losing money, and if that company is in debt, it just has to get along with the 1950s brownie greeny carpet that it's got on the floor, and it can't afford to build one of those brand new glass and steel and marble structures. That's the situation I think we're in right now in the United States Congress. We are about to bankrupt this country. We're $4 trillion in debt. It is not the time to be building a brand new glass and steel and marble structure as a headquarters building. It's time to stop projects like this, to put them on hold for a while, and get the fiscal house of this government in order and save some of this money that we're otherwise spending to add to our $4 trillion national debt. I'd also like to say that in hearing some of the speakers, I've heard that this is the only thing that could characterize an American vision, that going to Mars or being part of a manned space station is the only thing that can characterize American vision. Well, I reject that analysis. There are a lot of other things that characterize American vision. One of them that I think we should all be about in this Congress right now is getting this fiscal house in order, getting a handle on the $4 trillion national debt. If we do that, that's a significant vision for us here, the 435 members here, to be about. And that's something that would be tremendously beneficial to the American people. To state that vision, to reinvent government, to make it more efficient, downsized and right-sized. That's a good vision for America. It's not simply found in space exploration. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Roscoe Bartlett.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I rise in strong support of our space station mission. The United States is clearly the world's only superpower. We are the world's leader. We are the world's leader militarily. We are the world's leader politically, and we have got to remain the world's leader technologically. How can we be the world's leader if we are not the world's leader? When you look at programs like this, at putting the man on the moon, for instance, there was enormous spin-off from this. Spin-off in education, spin-off in the economic community. In Maryland alone, there are 275 companies that directly owe their existence to spin-off from this program. You know, the plea is made that we don't have enough money. And let me point out that even poor people go out to dinner once in a while or buy a pizza and bring it in. And I think that the amount of money spent on this program is a relatively small amount of money compared to a $1.6 trillion yearly budget. Another very important thing is that Americans need to feel good about themselves. Those of you who can remember the decade we spent putting a man on the moon, remember how good we felt about ourselves. We need that feeling again. When Willie Sutton was asked why did he rob banks, his response was because that's where the money is. If you ask me why we should put this effort into the space station, I will tell you that's where the future is. I rise in strong support of the space station. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Indiana.
Madam Chair, I would yield 2 minutes to a distinguished fiscal leader in the Democratic Party, Mr. Penny.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes. Without objection.
Madam Chairwoman, our offices have been flooded with phone calls, letters, and even faxes, all bearing the same message: cut spending first. It sounds simple, but we have been through the deficit landmines before, and we know how difficult it can be. Outside of entitlement programs, there are only a few big-ticket items that offer significant potential for both short-term and long-term budget savings. One of these items is the space station, which we are considering today, and the other is the superconducting supercollider, which we will have an opportunity to tackle later this week. The question then is not what to cut, but what do we have the will to cut? If we vote for the Roemer-Zimmer amendment to cancel funding for the space station, does it mean an end to our dreams for the future? No, to the contrary, killing this project may well protect our children by helping reduce the deficit, which, like a Jurassic Park clone, moves across the land, devouring their future. If we vote for the Roemer-Zimmer amendment, have we closed the door on the technological advances that have characterized the space program? No. According to Dr. Park of the American Physical Society, there is more technological sophistication in an $80 point-and-shoot camera than in space station freedom. Clearly, we can accomplish better space science through other NASA programs, including the Earth Observing System. If we vote for the Roemer-Zimmer amendment, will we alienate our international partners? First of all, it's clear that most of them are not wildly enthusiastic about this program. And it does not make sense for the United States to spend tens of billions of dollars just because our allies may spend a few. If we vote for the Roemer-Zimmer amendment, haven't we destroyed jobs in many areas, especially in the already beleaguered aerospace industry? This is a tough question because it does affect jobs in 39 states around the country, including some in my own district. But it does not make sense to spend tens of billions of dollars to support a few thousand jobs.
Gentleman's time has expired.
1 more minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. But it does not make sense to spend tens of billions of dollars to support a few thousand jobs producing a dubious product, which gets more dubious by the day as it's reformed and revised by this administration. This is just simply not good business. And it is never good business to continue pouring good money after bad. We've been down that road before. We should stop going down this road on this project. NASA Administrator Daniel Golden has said that this country is at a crossroads with his space program, and I agree. We are at a crossroads. I would say that it's time for us to boldly go where no Congress has gone before. Let's make a dramatic step for deficit reduction. Let's kill the space station.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, could you inform us as to how much time remains for the various parties?
The gentleman from California has 14 minutes. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, 26 and a half minutes. The gentleman from Indiana has 24 minutes. And the gentleman from New Jersey has 16 minutes.
I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Brooks of Texas.
Chairman. Without objection. Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Chairman. In this, Mr. Brown, gentleman from California. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of NASA and the space station. This nation needs NASA and the space station. It needs a forward-looking, bold, and risk-taking organization that sees to the future needs of our society, to the bold exploration of the unknown, to the questions we will face in the next century. 30 years ago, President John F. Kennedy argued for a strong national space program. He said we go into space not because it is easy, but because it's hard. Meeting the challenge of the space frontier gave us national prestige, but that was neither the only reason for NASA 30 years ago, nor is it now. The only prize we take away from our conquest of space today. Now we have a chance to define a new era in the wake of the Cold War, an era with new opportunities for peaceful cooperation in space among the nations in the world. The space program can be a catalyst for peaceful cooperation. We need a world-class space agency to help us open those new vistas of opportunity. The integral part of NASA is the space station. We're building the space station to enable human beings to safely conduct mankind's epic journey into space. The space station will be valuable to us in areas of competitiveness, education, exploration, international cooperation. This is a partnership of the United States, Canada, Japan, and European nations, which will allow the U.S. to maintain our leadership in space, continue to be a premier player into the 21st century. NASA with the space station will again capture the attention and the imagination of American students and motivate them to study the areas of math and science and engineering so necessary to help us maintain a workforce capable of competing in the global marketplace. Today, the space station represents thousands of jobs for Americans, which helps strengthen this nation economically. If you kill the space station, you also kill the American space industry. Let's keep America's leadership in space. Refuse to hamstring our future by foolishly cutting funds for our space station. I believe a society that does not dare to dream, a society that isn't willing to take risk, a society that has forgotten, if it ever knew how to be bold, is a society in great peril, a society in decline. History has shown that the great nations have been those that had a spark of risk-taking, of adventure, willing to operate at the frontiers of knowledge. Two more, Mr. Chairman.
I can yield the gentleman 1 more minute.
All right, I'll quit in 1 minute.
Gentleman may proceed for 1 minute.
We still expect our nation to do great things and tackle the great unknowns. NASA does that for our society. Through a small investment in relation to our budget we make in NASA and the space station, we Americans are able to see new horizons and new frontiers. We know already from 3 decades of evidence that these expeditions into the unknown have paid off with new knowledge, new techniques, and new products. You can't walk into a hospital today without being touched by the wonders that came to us from space exploration. Our daily lives are shaped by the digital revolution going on all around us. And NASA not only helped usher in that revolution, it has kept it going with new ideas and new products year after year. We lay the foundation of our future in this small corner of the vast federal budget. We owe it to ourselves, to our nation, and especially to our children to keep this dream alive.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Slaughter.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and Mr. Chairman, I want to express my support for the Roemer-Zimmer amendment to eliminate the space station. In an era of $300 billion plus budget deficits, the space station remains one of the most scientifically indefensible and fiscally unjustifiable projects backed by the federal government. This space station was only supposed to cost $8 billion when it was proposed in 1984. More than that is already spent by NASA with little to show for the expenditure. And the GAO recently projected the original space station Freedom would cost us more than $158 billion, somewhat more than the 8. Who can say exactly how much a lesser version of the station would end up costing taxpayers? The whole redesign effort only serves to illustrate that we can never significantly cut the space station's cost without sacrificing its few identifiable functions. Rather than turning our back to reality, we need to face up to the responsibility to make intelligent choices geared toward easing the strain on the federal budget. In short, continuing the space station is bad science and foolish fiscal policy, and I urge adoption of this amendment.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
2 minutes to Mr. Houghton.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank
for 2
you,
minutes.
Mr. Chairman. You know, when you find yourself down the line in debates, it's hard to be original. So let me try to recast some of the ideas and put them in perspective and at least make sense to me. And I have absolutely no proprietary interest in this whatsoever. Certainly there are scientific projects that have got to be controlled, no question about that. But also there are things like the space station which cannot be judged on a short-term basis. If you did it that way, you wouldn't do it at all. And also, you know, we're not sure what we can garner from the space science, but we do know what we've seen so far, that there's vast potential there in terms of energy, environment understanding, instruments, people analysis, materials. We're in a revolution of many forms, but one of them is material sciences, composites, metallics, inorganics. Also, economics are driven by two things. One, the economy of scale, and secondly, science. And since 95% of the world's population and the economy is moving away from us, we must concentrate on science. And therefore, we've got to look for leadership in science. And if we don't, it's no fun to be second. And space is one of those frontiers, as was TVA in the old days and the Manhattan Projects. And although most science is privately sponsored, every so often there's a project, a big item, that has got to be sponsored by the government. It makes the big leaps. It makes the other things possible. It makes the fallouts in terms of jobs and new science and new opportunities and improvement in our balance of trade possible. So if I ask you this, in this age of cost cutting, if I told you about a project that postures you as the #1 spot in the most exciting new area of science, which inexorably produce new jobs and new opportunities, and almost guarantees fallout in a variety of different areas, some of which I've just described, and at the same time saves 30% of the people costs, I think you would think it was a pretty good idea. I urge you to defeat Roemer, and I urge you to support the space station. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to another distinguished freshman who's on both the Education Committee and the Science Committee, Mr. Strickland.
The gentleman from Ohio may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, this debate is about choices. Now, some choices are difficult, others are easy. This is not a difficult choice for me. My list of priorities contains many programs that are far more critical to the well-being of this country than is the space station. Now, I would love to say that we had a space station. Who wouldn't? I would also love to have every child who is eligible for Head Start be enrolled. I would love to say to my constituents the federal government has so much money, we're going to give you a tax break this year. But that's not reality. What is reality? Reality is facing up to the ever-escalating budget deficit. Reality is cutting Medicare and veterans benefits in order to meet deficit reduction goals. Reality is 125,000 of my constituents without health insurance, 35% of whom are children. Reality is an American community where infrastructures are crumbling. Cutting the space station at this time is a responsible decision. It is the right decision, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California. Does the gentleman from California care to yield at this point?
Mr. Chairman, we suffer an embarrassment of riches of people who wish to speak, and we're getting a little pressed for time. I would like to yield at this point to Mr. Mineta of California 1 minute, recognizing that this is totally inadequate for the words of wisdom, which I know he has.
Gentleman may proceed.
I rise in very strong opposition to the amendment to terminate the space station program, and I ask Mr. Chairman for unanimous consent to submit for the record a statement by Speaker Foley in very strong support of the space station.
If the gentleman would suspend, that would be covered under general debate in the House.
The distinguished Speaker of the House, like so many of us in this chamber, knows that a first-rate American space program is not a luxury, it is a competitive necessity. But what really is at stake here, Mr. Chairman, is much more than the space station. What is at stake here is international competitiveness and our ability to succeed economically. I have often pointed out that it was no accident that the most dramatic growth in our high technology industries paralleled the years of NASA's greatest activity and accomplishment. A first-rate space program is today a competitive necessity, made much more so by the fact that aerospace employment in the United States is now approaching 7% of all American manufacturing jobs. In addition, the return on investment for NASA has been estimated at $7 to $9 for every $1 that we spend.
Gentleman's time has
as
expired.
far as I'm concerned, this is a necessity, and we must defeat this amendment to try to terminate the space station program.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Hoekstra.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, today I do not want to spend my time debating the merits of the science of the space station. There will no doubt be some benefit from the spin-offs of that program. I recognize the importance of research and development. I came from a company that spent 15 years researching, developing, and growing into one of the most successful companies in this country. But there comes a time when all programs must be reevaluated. Congress must control spending and show restraint. I hope that the vote on this issue does begin an era of cost-cutting. To date, we know that that has not been the case for Congress. This year, we face another $250 billion deficit. We have a $4 trillion debt. When a company continues to run deficits of 20 to 25%, they're required to cut costs, increase sales, or do whatever it takes to show a profit. Typically, research and development is one of the last areas that a company faces cuts in when they're facing tough times. That's why I don't like to cut R&D, but I believe that that's the situation we find ourselves in. We're unwilling to show restraint in other areas, so we ought to start taking a look at research and development. The space station has shown itself to be one big black hole that continues to suck in the dollars of the American taxpayer. That's not appropriate. Congress has to learn to show discipline, to show restraint, and to show self-control. The problem It's not an issue of science, it's Congress. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana. Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania wish to...
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. DeLay.
Gentleman may proceed for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had a long debate, and all the benefits have been enumerated of the space station and the space program. If you've lived any time at all since the 60s, you know of all the wonderful things that we enjoy now because of the space program. But I want to answer some of our critics. Our critics of the space program of this country say that they're making mistakes and there's overruns and we've got to stop this. Yeah, there's been some mistakes made, and there's been some overruns made, and some of it's made through misuse of priorities and things like that. But most of it's made because of poor management styles and poor management models. We correct that in this new redesign. I've been pushing very hard to make one prime contractor in charge of building space station, to make one center instead of 6 in charge of building the space station, to have one program director in charge of building the space station, and we have that. In fact, because of that management change, we get a lot of, or most of the savings that are realized in the redesign. But also, this is the first time that we've built a space station. And you're going to run into mistakes because it is the first time that we've built a space station. It just makes logical sense that you're going to make those kinds of mistakes. But it's been said, I think, on this floor that there's a lack of science. Dan Golden, Dr. Gibbons, and many others have said that most of the science that you voted for when you voted for space station freedom will be done on space station freedom derived. So we're going to get a little bit less science, but if you're going to have these kinds of savings, you've got to give up some science. But some very basic science, some very real science in all kinds of areas will be done with this redesign. And to my colleagues on this side of the aisle and to the authors of the amendment to say we've got to reduce the deficit, I've got the amendment right here. And I don't see anywhere in this amendment says that this savings is going to go to deficit reduction. Gentlemen and ladies, we know how this place works. And you freshmen that are against this, listen up. If you cut the money out of space station freedom, it's going to go somewhere else. I serve on VA HUD and Independent Agencies Subcommittee of Appropriations, and we can very easily, and it will be, this money will be taken from space station freedom and put over into HUD or put on. I mean, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Strickland, has already made a list of things he wants to spend this money on: Medicare, veterans benefits, health insurance, infrastructure. I'll yield it as soon as I'm finished with my statement. You know where this money's going to go. This is going to go out of good basic science into warm, fuzzy programs that they're all for. That's where there will be no deficit reduction from this savings. We know how this house works. The choice is, do we have a manned space program? Do we have exploration of space? And do we excite our young people to get into these sciences? That's the choice.
Gentleman's time has expired. At this point, the chair would announce that the gentleman from Indiana has remaining 23 minutes, the gentleman from California 9 minutes, the gentleman from New Jersey 13 minutes, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania 21 and a half minutes. The gentleman from Indiana.
I would just respond to the gentleman from Texas by saying that if he would like to work with me with report language or a colloquy on very strong language to have this go directly to the deficit, I would be happy to work with him on that if he'd change his vote. In the meantime, I'd like to recognize a distinguished member from the great state of Indiana, Mr. Jacobs, for 1 minute.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, have you ever noticed that some people are against any federal spending that won't make a contractor richer? And to the people all over the country, have you ever noticed that you have pretty short debates on things like college deferments during the Vietnam War, 60 seconds for the entire House, but debates where somebody can make some money rage on and on and on. To quote the philosopher Abe Martin, there's always plenty of money for everything but the necessities.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Fingerhut.
Gentleman may proceed for 1 minute.
Asking unanimous consent to revise and extend
Without
my
objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chairman for yielding. I'm as frustrated as we all are with having 1 minute to lay out all of the arguments that we'd like to make on behalf of this project and against the amendment. So let me confine myself to only one comment. This new member of Congress, along with the 110 others, has inherited many, many difficult problems for us to solve. But in solving those problems, we must always keep our eyes on the future. I was 4 years old, Mr. Brooks, when President Kennedy died. Little did I expect or have any notion that 30 years later I would be standing here as a member of the House of Representatives with a responsibility to help keep that flame alive, and not just out at Arlington National Cemetery, but in the life of our nation. In protecting the future and reducing the deficit, I'm going to do it in such a way that keeps this country looking forward to the future. I urge opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I congratulate Mr. Zimmer and Mr. Roemer for introducing this amendment. Mr. Speaker, it's easy to cut spending in the abstract. It's easy to say that we have to confront our federal deficit crisis in the abstract. But the federal deficit crisis is not an abstraction. It is a reality. And to confront this reality means that we are going to have to make some very tough choices. It is tough to say no. It is tough to set priorities, particularly when congressional districts across this country are going to have a piece of a particular project. But the reality is that there are things that we would like to do that we simply cannot afford to do. And what we need to do during those times is to say no. Households across America understand this. Successful businesses across America understand this. It is time that we in Congress understand this. Some proposals that have come to the floor, Mr. Speaker, have been labeled pie in the sky. This proposal is pork in the sky, and I think that it is time that we bring this pork down to earth by supporting the amendment before us. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Connecticut.
Gentlelady may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment and want to talk about the manufacturing processes involved in the space station, as well as the project's importance to maintaining our dominance in the aerospace industry. The space station imposes new and incredibly challenging requirements on manufacturers and engineers. You can't run to the hardware store to get a new part. You can't call the repairman in space if a system fails. So space engineers must design systems that will function perfectly for 30 years. Manufacturers must manufacture parts that will function perfectly for 30 years. This 30-year function standard is without precedent in our industrial experience and will set new standards of excellence throughout manufacturing in the decade to come. Furthermore, and just as important, building the space station will maintain our dominance in the aerospace industry. In 1990, we exported $39 billion in aerospace products and had a $27 billion positive trade balance. But while we used to dominate this market with 90% of the market share, we now have only 68%, with the Europeans, Japanese, Taiwanese, Russians poised to make significant gains. If we fail to build the space station, not only will we undercut our strength in aerospace and the science that underlies the products of the future, but we will open the door to a joint venture between the French and the Russians to build the space station. And if we pass up building Space Station Freedom and the Russians accept French overtures for a joint venture, the French and other European nations will close what is currently a 15-year technological gap with us and control the aerospace research that will create the next generation of aerospace products. We have an obligation not only to ourselves, but to all the nations that are working with us and to our young people who count on us to provide the career opportunities of the future, to direct and benefit from space discoveries that Space Station Freedom promises. And I urge you to defeat this amendment.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the 2 minutes to another distinguished freshman, a gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Mingy.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This debate over the space station pits a bizarre bipartisan coalition on one side against a bizarre bipartisan coalition on another. We find that we have space science enthusiasts and representatives of districts with substantial employment that would be affected by the termination of this program. On the other side, we have people who are preoccupied with the problems of the deficit and our nation's priorities. I would simply ask 2 questions. The first is, would you support a tax increase, an income tax increase, to finance this program? And secondly, if important programs are being cut or substantially scaled back in other areas, would you agree that the space station also should be subjected to that type of reduction or elimination? I submit that the answers to these questions are obvious. We are not willing to pay for the space station with a tax increase, and it must be a part of reduction of substantial numbers of programs across our entire federal budget and operation in order to balance the budget. That is a problem that we face. I yield back the balance of my time.
All right. The gentleman from California.
Again, with regret, I would like to yield only 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Andrews.
Gentleman from Texas may proceed for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Today, we face a very clear issue. Killing the space station means stopping our country's space program dead in its tracks. The space station is the platform of man's future in space, and the work that will go on there will have boundless opportunities and possibilities for future generations. Our trading partners understand this all too well. The French, the Canadians, the Europeans, all prepared to follow our leadership. If we falter now, if we renounce our commitment to them, they will surely look elsewhere, and they will also move ahead of us in this fierce competition in the future. We stand today in the shadow of the end of the Cold War, looking ahead to a new century with great challenge and great responsibility. Our generation owes much to the leaders of the past who made decisions that set America on a course of space exploration and achievement. And I refuse to believe that history will say of us in our time, they were the greatest, most powerful, and successful nation on earth.
The gentleman's
But when
time has
called
expired.
upon, they faltered and stood still and let their future pass them by. Let's build the space station.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, those who have reserved time with me are not on the floor at this moment. I'd like to reserve my time for the next round.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Linder.
Gentleman may proceed for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Chairman,
I have a scientific background, and others have spoken more eloquently to the science of this project, and I have a financial background, and the fiscal sides have been addressed. But we must begin to remember that we are a nation of dreamers and frontiers. America was the frontier 500 years ago when government money sent Columbus here, and indeed the Louisiana Purchase was too expensive for our government to make, and yet it has enriched us all. American money sent Lewis and Clark west and opened up the entire West to gold and to farming and to even wine production. And indeed, not that long ago, Seward's folly was a folly and yielded the largest cache of oil since Texas. Mr. Chairman, we must remain to be a nation of dreamers at the frontier. The only frontier left in the world is space, and it would indeed be a folly for us to turn our back on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I would yield 2 minutes to yet another distinguished freshman, Mr. Pomeroy.
The gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the Roemer-Zimmer amendment to eliminate funding for Space Station Freedom. I was 16 years old when we landed Neil Armstrong on the moon as the first person to set foot on the moon, an outstanding achievement for our space program. I believed then, as I believe now, that the United States must be a leader in space exploration. This does not mean, however, that we can afford a totally open-ended financial commitment, and unfortunately the Space Station Freedom represents such a commitment. Today, the budget deficit threatens the very underpinnings of our nation's economic security. The time to cut spending is now. We cannot afford to allow huge and hugely unsuccessful programs like the Space Station Freedom, a death with honor, throwing billions of dollars at it as it leads to an inevitable termination some years down the road. Today, NASA has been scrambling to reconfigure the space station to meet lower cost projections. Last week, President Clinton announced he'd favor a modified version at a 5-year cost of $10.5 billion. Unfortunately, the unreality of this cost projection was quickly exposed as administration officials were unable to elaborate either the revised space station design or how it would meet new cost limits. A more honest budget projection is that completion of the project will take much more than this amount, even to accomplish a substantially stripped-down mission. I would like to emphasize that for me, a yes vote on Roemer-Zimmer amendment is not a vote against U.S. space exploration. It is not a vote against NASA. It is a vote against the Space Station Freedom, a project that is rapidly losing its scientific missions and values, even as it continues to add billions to our staggering deficit.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
I would like to yield again an inadequate 1 minute to a distinguished member of the Appropriations Committee from the great state of Texas, Mr. Chapman.
Gentleman may proceed for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me just point out a couple of very simple facts in the brief time that I have. First, not $1 of NASA's budget, and certainly not a single dollar of the money spent on space station is spent in space. It's spent in the good old US of A, providing real jobs for real people, doing really important work on the real issues of the future of this country: science and technology, medical research, engineering, jobs that will create the future economic strength of our country. It has been said here today that NASA returns $7 to $9 to the economy for every dollar spent. There is no better investment in the future of America than investing in the technologies and the science that will keep America strong. Let's defeat the Roemer Amendment. Let's vote for the future of this country, its young people, its science, its technology, its economy. Let's vote for the space station program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I'll yield myself 3 minutes to respond to a couple of points that were made in the debate.
The gentleman may proceed.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. DeLay, made a comment that's been frequently made by the fiscal conservatives who oppose the space station, or rather who support the space station and oppose the amendment. that if we save the money from this program, it'll be spent, frittered away somewhere else. And so since the way this place works is that every dollar that's cut is snapped up by some other program, it's pointless and fruitless to try to cut the authorization. The only question I have for that gentleman and the others who make this argument is why then do you vote against so many other authorizations and so many other appropriations? I think it's our obligation, if we're serious about the budget deficit, to find those programs that are not cost effective and to oppose them, and then to make sure that the money that is freed up is not spent on less valuable programs, but in fact either goes for more valuable programs or for deficit reduction. I would urge my fellow porkbusters to look at the space station the way they would look at any other big public works program, because that's what it is. It's a public works program. It happens to be an orbiting public works program, but it's inefficient, and it does not provide the return for our dollar that we conservatives ask for any other program. We tend to get romantic and we tend to get dreamy-eyed when we see a public works program that's in orbit. But the principle is the same, and I urge my fellow conservatives to hold this program to the same standard as any other spending program. I yield back.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield to the gentleman from California, 2 minutes.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, when President Kennedy promised to put a man on the moon within a decade, Americans really didn't understand much about the space program, but they supported it. They supported it because they believed that man should not be bound by what he understood, but rather should be challenged by what was possible to understand. They supported it because they believed that the universe might hold secrets which could help people on Earth live better, longer, and more productive lives. And they supported it because they believed that it was part of the American dream to dream of things that have never been done before and then do them. Mr. Chairman, America needs the space station. We need it for biochemical research, biomedical research. We need it for biotechnology research. We need it for materials research. We need it for noise and vibration research. We need it for integrated circuit research. We need it for literally hundreds of scientific experiments. But most of all, Mr. Chairman, America needs the space station for the same reason we needed to send a man to the moon. We need the space station to continue the quest to renew the dream. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. At this point, the chair would like to announce the time remaining to each of the leaders. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Roemer, has 18 minutes remaining. The gentleman from California, Mr. Brown, has 6 minutes remaining. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Zimmer, has 9 minutes remaining. And the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Walker, has 16 and a half minutes remaining. Gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to a very distinguished gentleman from Nebraska with a very sharp whip, Mr. Hoagland.
Gentleman may proceed for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Roemer, my colleague from Indiana, for that kind introduction. I want to join this amendment offered by Tim Roemer from Indiana and Dick Zimmer from New Jersey, two longtime friends, and praise them for bringing this to the floor. You know, I continue to oppose the space station, as difficult as it is. I mean, recognizing that we have many of our most capable scientists that have invested enormously in this project, because we simply can't afford it. I mean, estimates are that we could spend as much as $100 billion over the lifetime of this project before it's done. We have a $300 billion deficit. We're suggesting to the American people deep cuts in Medicare, and food stamps, and the Earned Income Tax Credit, and a whole range of programs that simply have got to be cut back. And in light of that, I just don't think it makes sense to fund something like the space station. The reality is, to turn this economy around and to create jobs, we have to reduce the deficit. That's what this whole exercise is about on this very difficult bill presented by the administration that many of us supported 3 weeks ago. We're not going to turn around the economy. We're not going to create jobs for working families in America without reducing the deficit. And in light of that, I can't for the life of me see how we can support a project that could cost $100 billion before all is said and done. It's inevitable, colleagues. It's inevitable that this program is going to get postponed at some point. And as Chairman Brown recognizes, all I'm asking is that we postpone this 10 or 15 years until we can afford it. Let's just postpone it till we can afford it. It's inevitable. If you look at the budget resolution, at the budget figures for the next 5 years, there's no way we're going to be able to sustain this program. I think it makes sense to discontinue it now while it's still in the drawing stage, before there's been a significant investment in hardware, and put it behind us and make this tough decision now, as difficult as it is for all of us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield to my good friend from Ohio, the gentleman, Mr. Trafficant, for a lot of time, like a minute and a half.
Gentleman from Ohio may proceed.
A Congress that votes for huge foreign aid bills but kills the space station is un-American. A Congress that keeps military bases open overseas but closes the bases in Philadelphia is out of touch. But to then kill our space future is un-American. A Congress that will extend unemployment benefits and provide billions for retraining, yet kill our space future, is out of sync with reality. Beam me up, Mr. Speaker. 75,000 jobs in 40 states, high-tech jobs, scientists and engineers, just the jobs that Congress keeps promising to all of these laid-off workers in America. Now, I didn't hear anybody suggest financing the foreign aid bill with a tax increase like I heard today. And I say on the House floor, a member that will vote for foreign aid but kill the space industry in America is not only out of touch, but in my opinion, un-American. I oppose this amendment. The gentleman means well, but this isn't well-meaning for the future of America. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
I'd like to reserve my time.
Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania wish to yield?
I have another speaker coming. I reserve my time at the moment.
Does the gentleman from Indiana wish to yield?
I wish to yield 1 minute to distinguished member from Rhode Island, Mr. Reed.
The gentleman may proceed for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the Roemer Amendment to eliminate funding for the space station. Today, the question before us is not whether we support space exploration and scientific research. Rather, the question is, how do we invest our scarce resources prudently and wisely? This amendment is about whether we are willing to listen to our constituents and make tough choices to cut and reduce our deficit. The space station is a wonderful idea, but unfortunately the space station is an incredibly expensive goal with engineering design problems, serious cost overruns, as well as no specific mission. Now is not the time to continue funding a program that has lost its way. It is a time to address down-to-earth issues like the deficit and the economy. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to remember their constituents when they cast their vote on this amendment. I urge support of the Roemer Amendment. I thank the gentleman from Indiana and yield the balance of time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I will yield to the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Mullahan, a member of the Appropriations Committee, 1 minute.
Gentleman may proceed for 1 minute.
Only because he's so eloquent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Yet another vote on space station program. There's only one reason that you could even consider voting against the space station, and that is if you are convinced that the United States has no future role to play in manned space. Many people have supported the concept of a space station, but in the past expressed reservations about this NASA program. Well, if you were concerned about the cost of the program, you need to understand that the President assembled a redesign team and an independent Blue Ribbon Advisory panel to undertake an extensive redesign review of the space station, which will cost now $4 billion less in development over the next 5 years, and $18 billion less in operations. If you're skeptical about the government's management of such a large program, you should feel comfortable knowing that the administration has charged NASA to reduce civil service employment and even subcontract support personnel by 30%, and the agency is moving quickly to effect that. If you think that eliminating this program will affect our nation's role only, you must not forget that the high-level intergovernmental agreements and treaty status of the United States entered to by 11 countries
The
would be
gentleman's time has
obligated.
expired.
Ladies and gentlemen, this program is extremely important, and the Appropriations Subcommittee on which I serve has funded this. The subcommittee chairman has found ways to fund this program at a growth rate of only 1.6%.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I urge defeat of the Roemer Amendment.
The gentleman from, does the gentleman from New Jersey wish to yield?
I do not at this point.
Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania wish to yield?
I yield myself 5 minutes.
Gentleman may proceed for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, when I grew up as a child of the 50s, our space stations were tree houses and our spaceships were cardboard refrigerator boxes. Men and women had not yet flown into space, but we knew that they would. And when our dreams became reality in the early 60s, the nation experienced an unprecedented pride in its technological prowess and in its unique place in history. 30 years later, we still measure that which we want to achieve with our demonstrated ability to go to the moon. But today's debate here on this floor shows that some among us are willing to be satisfied with those past glories and now ridicule and retreat from tomorrow. The space station represents the necessary next step in man's conquest of space. You cannot seriously say you are for continued manned spaceflight and be against the station. You cannot seriously say that you believe in an aggressive space program and be against the station. Our ability to do great things which fulfill the dream of space exploration depend upon building a space station. If that station is not built now, it will be built by someone sometime in the future. If we choose to say today that space station cannot and will not be built by us, it will be our decision to rest on past glories and not to move ahead. Are there questions about space station which need to be raised before committing scarce national resources to its completion? Of course there are. Important questions. Station opponents will raise the questions of cost, and they have and they should, and questions of the mission of the space station. Those questions deserve good answers. The cost issue must be decided on the basis of whether the station is a wise investment in our technological future. I believe it to be. I believe that it is an investment which will pay us back many times over in leading-edge technological developments. And the mission of research and development in a wholly unique place is a mission enough for any project. The ability to do real work in an environment so hostile that it allows no mistakes is a mission which cannot be duplicated in any other way. But the opponents' questions are not the only ones deserving of an answer. Because this decision is historic in its implications, we should look at some of the issues which future generations will use to evaluate whether we did the right thing or the wrong thing. If we are capable of doing something of great significance and decide not to take the risk or commit the resources, history is likely to judge that decision harshly. We are certainly capable of building a space station. The failure to do so will not be a failure of competence, but a failure of will. If building a space station contributes to our technological capability and we choose not to provide ourselves with that economic edge, future generations will probably question why. The technology demanded in a space station is absolutely leading edge. Just building a space station demands that we do things that we must learn to do. Creating that leading edge of technology and technology innovation also creates a wake behind it, much in the same way that a powerboat plowing through water creates a wake. In the case of the space station, however, the wake is a series of technology developments in computers, robotics, materials, pharmaceuticals, closed-loop environmental systems, and the like, all of which contribute to our global competitiveness. If building a space station gives us the capacity to do things and discover things that are beyond our dreams and our imagination, then it is worth doing for that reason alone. Those who oppose station do so in part because they do not believe we will learn enough aboard it to justify it. I believe we will learn more aboard station that we do not even know how to describe today than we will in the prescribed mission. In other words, what we don't know we are going to learn on station is more important to the future than what we now know. And that's the adventure of discovery and exploration. It's an adventure that has always been a part of this nation's legacy and very much a part of its greatness. Shall we be the generation that abandons that legacy? I hope not. Since the days when John F. Kennedy committed this nation to its future in space, we have looked upward and outward, confident of that future. We went into space, as President Kennedy said, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Today, if we reject that future by abandoning the space station, we will no longer look skyward. We will begin to look down toward our feet, planted firmly on the ground. We will accept the future defined by what we know rather than what we do not know, something easy rather than something hard. And having made that decision, we will be the lesser for it. The renowned British statesman Benjamin Disraeli described the history of nations as moving from bondage to faith, from faith to courage, from courage to freedom, from freedom to abundance, from abundance to complacency, from complacency to dependency, and from dependency back to bondage. To me, the space station speaks to freeing ourselves from the bondage.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
The space station speaks to freeing ourselves from the bondage of earthbound constraint. But the building of it requires unbounded faith in the future, courage of a special kind, and a belief in the manifest destiny of freedom. The reward will be a new abundance for ourselves and our posterity in large part because we will find new things that we do not know about today and cannot begin to describe. How can I say that with confidence? Because history tells us so. It tells us that nations who are willing to take a risk on the future prosper as a result. And those who drift toward competency and dependency, what happens of them? They drift away from defining destiny and allow others to take their place in leadership. The space station is about scientific leadership. It is about technological innovation. It is about being at the forefront of exploration in an age of revolution. But most of all, it is about history. The space station is about choosing to extend the reach of humankind beyond the Earth to a new place of permanent habitation. We are capable of taking this historic and necessary step. Not to do so will be a mistake of historic proportion.
The gentleman yield just very briefly to
The gentleman's time has expired.
Purely to compliment him on a very statesmanlike speech, a very eloquent speech, and I know that he meant it from the heart.
I thank you, gentleman.
Gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman from Indiana wish to yield time?
Mr. Chairman, I too would like to compliment Mr. Walker on a very good speech, even though I disagree with some of it, a very high level and good content of speech on an important topic. I would like to yield 2 minutes to the very talented gentleman from Louisiana with a great sense of humor, Mr. Tozan.
The gentleman may proceed without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I just learned that the Appropriations Committee on Transportation has cut $11 million from the Coast Guard for drug interdiction, has cut the funds for necessary replacement of 50-year-old buoy tenders that keep our waterways safe, has cut the funds for the VTS systems, the systems that are going to go in our ports and harbors to keep vessels from colliding with one another. And why? Because they want the money for public works projects. I think it's time we face the music. The space station can be defended in 100 beautiful speeches because it is a good project, just as a good highway project in your district is a good project. The space station is going to have incredibly good effects if we ever build it. But I can tell you here and now it's time for us to face the music. If we cannot cut the big ticket items in our budget, items we'd like to have but can't afford, and at the same time cut interdiction funds on drugs, and cut our ability to keep oil from spilling on the waters in this country, and cut the ability of the Coast Guard to protect the lives and the fortunes of folks who ply the waters of this country, then I suggest to you, what else are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Will we all be forced to increase the taxes on the backs of Americans again and again and again to try to deal with a budget out of control because we cannot discipline ourselves here today? Here is where we start. If we can't cut these big ticket items that are very flashy, very friendly, very lovely, if we can't cut these, how on earth will we get this thing under control? How on earth will we avoid the massive tax increases that we're going to have to put on the backs of Americans to balance our books? How do we avoid this fiscal insanity? Here is where we start. Here is where we must finish the job of cutting spending first and doing it in a sane manner for the sake of this country and its economy. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman from California wish to yield time?
I would like to yield time to my very good friend and very patient friend, Mr. Applegate from Ohio. 2 minutes.
The gentleman may proceed.
1.5 minutes.
The gentleman may proceed for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think that the question today is whether or not the United States is going to continue to move on in the space age or if we're going to retreat into the Stone Age. If we fail, future generations are going to lose. Our school children who want to look to space for educational purposes are going to lose, and what a shame that would be. We are nothing more than a grain of sand in the sea of space, and we need to seek new horizons. Can you imagine if the naysayers had defeated Christopher Columbus, where we would be today? Congress must not allow itself to be fooled by the cost-cutters who do not know the difference between cost and value. You save $1 billion in cost, you lose $100 billion in value. I could show you a booklet. I could tell you about a lot of the benefits that come out of the space programs, and the Neanderthals will come forward as they did with Columbus and discount all of the benefits. But the facts, my friends, are there. And we can let Germany do it. We can let Japan do it. But I say that the United States must not get out of the way. The United States must not follow. The United States must lead.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair would inform all members that time remaining, the gentleman from Indiana has 13 minutes. The gentleman from California has 2 minutes. The gentleman from New Jersey has 9 minutes. The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 10.5 minutes. Does the gentleman from New Jersey wish to yield time?
I yield myself 4 minutes to respond to the eloquent and passionate remarks of the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Walker.
The gentleman may proceed for 4 minutes.
Mr. Walker made a statement that talked to us about romance and history and leadership, and it's those sorts of things that makes me want to support the space station, but my head tells me that we're not buying that for the money that we're spending, and we can't afford what would be delivered because it's not worth the money that we're spending. Mr. Walker was candid enough to say there remain serious questions about the space station, and they have to be answered. Let me focus on what those serious questions are. Last week, there was a briefing in the White House by senior administration officials who, after the president made his decision as to what he thought the space station should be, those administration officials could not tell us what features of Option A and Option B would be included in the new space station. There was a question, are you going to go up to the standard NASA orbit, or are you going to go up higher after the Russian orbit? That's a $400 million question. The answer, that decision has not been made. There's another, can you tell me the impact of the Canadian on the Canadian contribution? Answer, those negotiations aren't complete. Another question, what can you tell us about contracts? Answer, I can't tell you enough yet to be informative. Question, can I follow up on the Russians? Will there be an effort to go beyond incorporating the Soyuz as part of the space station to involve Russians in this project? There's a long, long answer, the last sentence of which is, and that's gobbledygook, I know, but it was sort of intended to be. Finally, who's going to make the final decision about the inclination? That's the orbital question. Will the White House make that? Answer, beats the hell out of me. These are the questions that Mr. Walker was referring to. We are being asked to buy not just pork in space, but a pig in a poke. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania wish to yield time?
I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California.
The gentleman may proceed for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of the future of this nation's effort in space and space station freedom in particular. Let us not fail to realize that these two are inextricably linked together. The space station defines the very vision of space, a vision that must include humankind. If we're to continue our commitment to manned exploration, then the space station must be the stepping stone. Sadly, today's debate largely revolves around the short-sighted issue of cost. Sadly, we're close to defining our character based on price. That is not what Americans have done in the past. Will the station be an expensive proposition? Of course. But should such concerns mean we turn away from exploration? Of course not. We cannot turn away from the proposition that we must continue to grow and reach into the world around us. If there's a stronger proponent of deficit reduction in this chamber than myself, I'd like to know who that is. But we should not sacrifice our long-term interests as a nation, as a world, for short-term considerations. For those who scarcely see beyond green eye shades, I would add that the cost today is less of a concern than just a few months ago. The President has made very clear his commitment to have an effective and an efficiently manned space station. The President has assured us that the administration will be very watchful in these areas. And I would take that commitment. On the Republican side, I think we can say this is certainly very valid, and I believe the President when he says that. And I would urge my colleagues to support the space station, not stop the American adventure, and to fulfill the dreams of not only young people in society, but all of us who want this nation to be the leader in this area in the years ahead. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the articulate chairman of the Black Caucus, Mr. Mafume.
The gentleman may proceed.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me say to Mr. Walker and to Mr. Brown and Mr. Roemer how heartened I am at the level and the quality of debate on this very crucial issue that is so significant in determining our nation's future. I was taught as a child to work hard, play by the rules, love our country, and to cherish our faith. It is because I love my country that I stand here today in support of this amendment to stop once and for all this expenditure. And at the risk of being the idealist that I am, let me also offer for your consideration as I say to you and remind myself that the people of this nation and the quality of life in America is far more important to me than being able to establish a floating laboratory in space. Canceling this project at this time will give us an additional $11 billion in budget authority that we could use. It gives us additional $10 billion in budget outlays that we certainly could use. It says that the $9 billion that we would have already spent by the end of this year ought to stop. And it says also that maybe we ought to look at putting our effort and our time and our money into space science and space exploration and not just this laboratory. Now, I know that there are some who still want to boldly go where no man has gone before. The question is, at what expense and at whose expense? And I would suggest to you that it is the expense of the taxpayers of this nation. If we want to establish some space stations and we want to really go about the job of trying to establish efforts to do things that are new and meaningful and will propel us into the future, let's establish some stations to reduce homelessness, to end hunger, to fight crime, to educate people throughout this nation, to make our streets safe for the citizens who have to walk, to give us new hope and new energy and new meaning, to really deal with our budget deficit, but not at this crucial time. Take money that we don't have and to toss it almost aimlessly away. I urge members here to support the amendment by the gentleman, Mr. Roemer.
The gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman from California wish to yield at this time?
Unfortunately, the gentleman from California has yielded too much and prefers to reserve the balance.
The gentleman is running a little low, yes. Does the gentleman from New Jersey wish to yield?
How much time do I have remaining, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from New Jersey has 7 minutes remaining.
I yield 1.5 minutes to my colleague from New Jersey, the gentlewoman from New Jersey, Mrs. Brockman.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of this amendment. House of Representatives must start listening to the American public and come down to earth now. We must eliminate this wasteful spending like the space station. Space program has been fundamentally flawed from the beginning, and by the way, it was very controversial from the beginning. It was so fundamentally flawed that President Clinton's current design option only satisfied 1/8 of its original design objectives. I think that tells this body a lot. Moreover, each time NASA redesigns the space station, its utility diminishes, its cost escalates, and it directs desperately needed funds away from other scientifically valid programs. The space station has always been of dubious worth, and the scientific benefit to be derived from the current space station design is even more elusive. With the price on this, and you know that it's going to reach at least $120 billion in the future, at such a price, the space station is clearly directing funds away from other scientific programs, but most importantly, the space station is steering money away from the deficit, which is job one, deficit reduction. Mr. Chairman, it seems ironic that the proponents of the station argue that it is a gift for future generations, when in reality, the space station's greatest gift to the future generations is going to be its addition to the enormous federal deficit. Please support this amendment.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana. Oh, I'm sorry, the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Did you wish to yield further?
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrich.
Gentleman from Georgia may proceed for 3 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I thank my friend from Pennsylvania for yielding to me. I remember about a year ago we had a very similar vote, and I was very struck by the rhetoric that day because it seemed to me that it came to the heart of what this decision is really all about. And person after person got up and they talked about what it had meant to them as young people when they first heard President Kennedy talk about going to the moon, and what it meant to them when they first began to think about America's leadership visibly around the world in space, and what it meant to them to think of a better engineering and better scientific future. And I used to teach history, and I couldn't help but remember that early in the 15th century, about 1410, the Ming Dynasty sent a huge fleet out. They went all the way to Madagascar, a much, much bigger fleet than any European country had. And they found many, many things to look at. And they went back home to China. And the Chinese government said, no, no, there's too much risk in going beyond the Middle Kingdom. There's too much danger. It's too big a waste of money. And so China quit looking at the future. China quit expanding. And the Ming Dynasty closed down Chinese society and stopped at the borders. 400 years later, Chinese civilization, which for 2,000 years had been the most complex and sophisticated on the planet, disintegrated under the weight of the assault of Europeans. Now, in the early phases, 1410, 1450, 1500, if you'd looked at those tiny Portuguese ships and those tiny Spanish ships, and you looked at the giant junks of the Chinese fleet, you would have said clearly which side was going to win. But one side had the courage to continue to explore. One side was prepared to go into the future. One side, no matter how small the ship, no matter how fragile, no matter how unknown, was prepared to dare. That's what this vote's about. This vote is about turning our back on the future and leaving the future to Japan, to Europe, to Russia and China, because the question's not man in space. The question is Americans in space. Man will be in space. Whether it's a Russian, Chinese, Japanese alliance or a Russian-European alliance, man will be in space. The question is whether Americans will be in space. This may be the most important single vote we cast this year, seen 50 years from now. Imagine that Isabel had said to Columbus, you know, we just can't afford it this year. I don't think you ought to discover America. Imagine that the Portuguese had decided we really can't afford to go south along the African coast, so they wouldn't have discovered the East Indies. Imagine if you will, that the Wright brothers had said, you know, we can't get that train ticket all the way to Kitty Hawk. What the heck? We don't need an airplane. That's what this decision's about. This is not about money. This is about whether or not we Americans have enough faith in our children and grandchildren, enough commitment to the future, enough willingness to do something right. Because the truth is, the amount of money we're going to spend today isn't decisive to the national debt, but it is decisive to our future in the universe. It isn't decisive in terms of getting down the deficit, but it is absolutely, literally a binary decision, like turning a light switch on and turning it off. If you vote in favor of the space station, you are voting to turn on the light switch of the future. But if you vote to kill it, then don't kid yourselves. 15 years from now, when your children watch a Russian or a Chinese or a Japanese or a European in space, and there is no American there, on this day, you sealed our fate for a generation on whether or not we're in space. I urge everyone to vote to keep the space station. This is a vital vote for America's future.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana,
Mr. Chairman, I would yield 2 minutes to a distinguished freshman from Massachusetts, Mr. Meehan.
The gentleman may proceed for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in strong support of this amendment to cancel the space station program. And I ask my colleagues to think long and hard before casting their vote today. We have a federal budget deficit of over $250 billion. We're paying more than $200 billion a year on interest on the national debt. We're going to spend more money over the next 5 or 6 years. We'll be spending more money on interest of the national debt that we pay in defense spending in this country. During the course of my campaign for Congress, I had an opportunity to put together a deficit reduction plan, line by line, item by item. When one takes the time to do that, it means that difficult choices have to be made. In another era, another time, another decade, this would be a worthwhile project. But we cannot afford to take out a credit card again and put what could be $100 billion on it. We have to worry about the next generation of Americans, because what's going on in this country with deficit after deficit is morally reprehensible. We have American jobs in the United States that we're losing. We need to develop new jobs. The standards of living in this country are going down. Educational standards in our schools are going down. We can't even afford to send the next generation of Americans to college, never mind exploring in space. I think it's extremely important that members disregard the jobs that are going to be created in their own district. Massachusetts will get a piece of the action in this bill. My own district will get a piece of the action in this bill. But it's about time we look at spending items as to whether or not they're in the national interest. And this is not in the national interest in this time. And I urge that members vote in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman from California wish to yield at this point?
Gentleman reserves his time.
Does the gentleman from Indiana wish to yield further time?
Mr. Chairman, I would yield 1 minute to the Democratic freshman class president, Eva Clayton.
The gentlewoman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is important for us to remember during these fiscal troubling times that in order to reduce the deficit, we all must sacrifice. Although scientific research, especially that done in space, has been vital and important to the progress of our nature and our future, now is the time, however, to say we must make hard choices between important things, and now we must take the great expenditure that we have been making in space to say it must be on the table for consideration. And therefore, in the light of that, how can we ask our families, our senior citizens, our children, our hospitals, our schools, our communities to make all sacrifice? How can we say to those who are unemployed and those who are seeking jobs that they must make the sacrifice, but space may not? We must sacrifice the burden as those of us who believe in scientific research, and I submit I do, it suggests that we mean that all things must be on the table. There is no sacred cow. This is the time to be fiscal responsible. This is the time to invest in our families, in our children, in our community. We must support this amendment. More importantly,
the
NASA.
gentlewoman's time
Hold an
has
additional
expired.
minute.
Gentlewoman may proceed for an additional minute.
Thank you. More importantly, NASA projects need the extra money. Robbing Peter to pay Paul is not the way to effect scientific research. It is not the way to be efficient, and it certainly is not the way to ensure the quality of the research that ultimately will affect the lives of our family. I urge the support of this amendment.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair would announce that the time remaining is the gentleman from Indiana has 7 minutes, the gentleman from California 2 minutes, the gentleman from New Jersey 5½ minutes, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania 4½ minutes. Does the gentleman from Indiana wish to yield?
Mr. Chairman, just to ask if the gentleman from California, in order to hear the eloquent words, I will regret doing this, but if Mr. Backus and Mr. Brown would need an additional 2 minutes of my time, I would be happy to yield those 2 minutes.
The gentleman is extremely generous, and we will give him gold stars in his crown for doing that.
You're taking my time?
Yes.
I would then yield, out of my remaining 5 minutes, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Schumer.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes. Without objection, gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the amendment to kill the space station. Now, I've been an opponent to space station freedom in the past. That's no secret, and I once authored an amendment to kill it. This year, however, I had kept an open mind. When the administration proposed a redesign of the space station, I said, okay, let's see what they can come up with. Dan Golden came to my office. He met with other opponents of the space station, Mr. Zimmer, Mr. Roemer, the authors of this amendment. We wanted to hear straight from NASA what would make the redesigned space station different from the problem-plagued disaster it has been. I also wanted to give the administrator charged with cleaning up a troubled and floundering agency a chance to make that happen. Unfortunately, I'm disappointed. The redesigned space station is just more of the same, a scaled-down version of the old model that still costs too much and does too little. I've repeatedly weighed the value of the space station against the need for deficit reduction and the need for fiscal responsibility at NASA. And there's no question in my mind that the new design is still just a waste of money, a program hopelessly in search of a mission. The original 8 missions are cut down to 1.5. The projected cost has gone from $8 billion to build, who really knows, it could cost us $9 billion. Nothing is up there yet. And as to why we're building the space station, the $64,000 question, I'd only quote from an interview with John Gibbons, the President's science advisor. When asked a year ago what he thought, when asked earlier this year what he thought the space station should do, Gibbons replied, quote, "That has been one of our problems. We haven't defined our objectives as well as we could or should. If you're a solution looking for a problem, that is much more difficult than a problem looking for a solution." Inadvertently or not, Mr. Gibbons put his finger on the problem. Space station is a solution looking for a problem, and a very expensive solution is that. We want to spend billions and billions of dollars on something we don't even know what we want it to do for, what we want it to do for us. So I know it's a tough vote for some of my colleagues. I also think we should explore space. But the gold-plated space station is not the way to do it.
Gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman from California wish to yield time at this point?
Gentleman would like to reserve his time. But,
gentleman reserves his time. Does the gentleman from New Jersey?
It is our anticipation that we will close,
yes.
Mr. Chairman.
I'll yield myself 2 minutes to respond to the minority whip, Mr. Gingrich.
Gentleman may proceed for 2 minutes.
Mr. Gingrich made a point of putting this
historical perspective, and I think that's entirely appropriate. But rather than using the analogies that he picked, I think because this space station is in fact a technological dead end and will draw away resources that are needed for true manned space exploration in the future, the appropriate analogy should be to our recent technological flops in big science, such as the abandoned and wisely abandoned supersonic transport, the Synfuels Corporation, the Clint-Schreeder breeder reactor, or if you want to get truly classical, the Great Pyramids of Egypt. The problem with this space station is that it will not bring us closer to that ideal of going back to the moon and on to Mars. It is starving even the program, the only program we had to plan to do so, the Space Exploration Initiative. This is a program that will keep us from reaching the dreams of Mr. Gingrich, which are my dreams as well and those of the American people. We've become obsessed with this piece of hardware that is sucking up the money, and we think that it's going to make our dreams come true. It will thwart those dreams. I yield back my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, do you wish to yield time at this point?
Mr. Chairman, could we get some idea as to how many more speakers each side has left? That would help me in understanding what we ought to do in terms of yielding time.
Gentleman from
Mr.
California.
Walker, I'm going to ask Mr. Backus to close on our side, and if I have an extra minute, I will speak briefly.
Well, my intention was to yield you a minute so that you would have a little bit of time to speak in addition to Mr. Backus.
All right.
On the argument, and I will be happy to do so at this point. Do you have additional speakers or?
No, I don't, and I would just reserve my remaining time for my closing.
I have no more speakers, and I will close.
So we're really in a position here where we're going to wrap. I would yield a minute to the chairman, and then it's also my intention to give a minute to Mr. Backus for his summation as well.
Could the chair inquire, does the chairman wish to take his time to close now? Or?
The chair is going to let Mr. Backus close, and the chair understands that he's been yielded an additional minute by Mr. Roemer and a minute by Mr. Walker, which would give him 4 minutes, and I would have 2 minutes if Mr. Walker and Mr. Roemer each yield me a minute.
We're calculating, Mr. Chairman.
That's why he's chairman.
This is the kind of higher math that goes into the space station.
The chair will announce the time available to all members before the time swaps begin. The gentleman from California has 5 minutes. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, 3 1/2. The gentleman from Indiana has 3. The gentleman from New Jersey has 4. And that is and the chair would announce that is after the gentleman from Pennsylvania has given his minute, I believe, to the gentleman from California.
Right. Well, maybe what I need to do is give yet another minute so that you have all of the time to yield to Mr. Backus, because my intention is to give a minute to the chairman and also to give Mr. Backus 1 of our minutes.
So the chair understands the gentleman from California at this point would have 6 minutes. The gentleman from Pennsylvania would have 2 1/2 minutes. And the gentleman from now, does the gentleman from California wish to yield?
I will yield myself 2 minutes at this time, Mr. Chairman, and may I use that time to again express my appreciation to all of the participants in this debate. I think the debate has been a good one in which each of the speakers has made a succinct and important contribution to our understanding of the space station. Obviously, I didn't agree with all of the positions taken, but I think they were well presented, and I would particularly like to commend Mr. Zimmer and Mr. Roemer for the way in which they've handled themselves in this debate. I attribute that to the fact that they have served on the committee I have the honor to chair and have learned how to conduct themselves very well on that committee, and they have presented themselves very well here today. May I just make about 1 or 2 small points here? It has been said that there is very little scientific value to the space station, and I think that that has been rebutted over and over again. I was particularly struck in a meeting that I had recently with representatives of the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Engineering, who pointed out to me that the most important aspect of the space station was that it would provide humans with the first experience in constructing complex structures in space, and that no further human exploration could take place until we had that experience in space with humans constructing and then living in those complex structures. The laboratories will make some additional contributions to science, but I think the laboratories themselves, which are independent units attached to the space station, will not carry the significance that the mere feat of having humans for the first time erect and construct a massive structure in space, learn how to operate it, learn how to repair it, learn how to live in it, that in itself represents an important step for mankind, which more than pays for the cost of the space station in itself. I firmly believe that that is our destiny, for human beings to go into space, and we cannot do it without this experience of creating, operating, and understanding the space environment through a space station.
The gentleman's time has expired. Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania wish to yield time at this point?
I yield myself the remaining time.
The gentleman is recognized for the balance of his time. The chair would ask members and those in the gallery if you would please be silent. This is a conclusion of a very, very important debate, and I would ask that everyone devote their full attention to it. The gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a statement here from the minority leader, Mr. Michael, that I would like to put in the record.
The chair would say that needs to be inserted in the full House.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I too believe that there have been a number of important and valuable issues raised on the floor today, and the debate has helped us, I think, understand the various aspects of this issue. I think, though, that it is important to realize that when people say that there is nothing for this station to do, that it is simply a flying machine without a mission, it seems to me that they have not yet looked at the reality. If you go to the Johnson Space Center, they will show you a bioreactor that is working today on Earth. The bioreactor has the ability to grow new human tissue. They are literally growing micro-miniature lungs. They spin them out, this new human tissue, and the problem is in the gravity forces, that tissue drops to the bottom of the vessel and is destroyed. In space, on the space station, when they use that bioreactor, they will be able to grow that new human tissue to full size. They'll be able to grow new human lungs. They'll be able to grow new optic nerves, new spinal cords. They'll be able to grow skin tissue. What does that mean? Well, ultimately it means, once we get the transportation costs down to space, that we may have the ability to do transplants that are absolutely compatible with the human body and would not be rejected. And that we would be able to grow that tissue for those people in the future and not have to worry about donors. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to have come out of this? But that's a ways off. What we do know is that that human tissue can be used for research and development. It means that instead of doing animal experimentations, we'll do experimentations on real human tissue and have the capability of understanding things that we don't now have the ability to understand in laboratories. That's not only using a laboratory in space, that's enhancing laboratories on Earth as a result of what we do in space. That's a capability this space station is going to give us almost immediately upon its permanent habitation. You see, that's the great thing about this. We are going to permanently inhabit an environment that mankind has never inhabited before. And we're going to learn all of these things. We know a little bit about what we're going to learn. We don't know all of what we're going to learn. But what we do know is we are going to learn great things. My friend from New Jersey says that that's the romance of this. Well, it's romance, yes, but it's reality too. Because nothing that he can tell us about the future that he envisions gives us those capabilities. No robotic spacecraft can do it. The space shuttle can't do it. Nothing in their plans for the future gives us any of those capacities. Only space station gives us those capacities. And only space station gives us the capacity to move from here further into the universe, because we have to learn the life sciences. We have to learn how men and women perform in weightlessness over long durations of time before we can hope to explore the universe beyond. I happen to believe that that's one of the destinies of humankind. We will determine that destiny for Americans here today. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Indiana, do you wish to yield time at this point? Does the gentleman intend to consume all of his time? Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to address my comments to the 110 new freshmen of this body that I think will hold in their hands and their voting cards the outcome of this very, very important vote. We've had bipartisanship. Mr. Zimmer and I, as sophomores, have worked very closely on this issue. We've had a high level of debate. We haven't just talked about pies in the skies or black holes on Earth. We've debated this issue as we did in committee. We've had an open rule, and we've showed the freshmen when we want this institution to work, it can work. We can debate issues, we can disagree, and we can elevate debate for the citizens of this great country. I grew up in the 1960s and used to put boots and gloves on and pretend like I was an astronaut running around the backyard, jumping out of trees. We heard Mercury astronauts talk about, let's light this candle up. We heard John F. Kennedy talk about putting a man on the moon. We heard Neil Armstrong's words echoing beautifully around this country. But now that's not the same, NASA, the glory and the dreams. And we freshmen and we sophomores came here not just to say, yes, keep doing the same thing. We came here to fight for change, to fight for the taxpayers' money, to reform NASA when NASA is not doing the right thing. And I am a strong supporter of manned space and a strong supporter of NASA. But what we face, freshmen and sophomores in this body, is not just institutional reform of Congress, but reform of the agencies that we have the constitutional ability to perform our oversight function. Robert Louis Stevenson said, each of us will eventually sit down to a banquet of consequences. Well, our older generation is going to have the banquet, and our children are going to face the consequences. Let us work on small programs like Measure, the Mars Environment Survey, to help reform procurement and contracts in NASA. Let us not fail to dream and to dream big, but let us also dream of reforming our institutions in Congress and starting with NASA to make this place work better in a bipartisan fashion and not forget our dreams. Richard Feynman in Genius said, it's not just boldness and risk, it's common sense that makes our genius in this country. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey has 4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from California has 4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from California has the right to close. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Before I close, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Ewing, for a unanimous consent request.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the Zimmer-Roemer amendment to eliminate the space station and ask unanimous consent to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard about our international partners and what a terrible thing it would be to leave them in a lurch by giving up on the space station. This is a serious issue, and our credibility abroad is very important. But I would like to read to you from a recent edition of Space News about two of our most important international partners. It says, the apparently crumbling interest in the space station in Germany and Italy, which together had been scheduled to pay for 69% of Europe's Columbus Space Station laboratory,
has been accelerated by the space station turmoil in the United States, but is also independent of it, officials said. Quote, Germany clearly thinks Columbus, that's part of the space station, our space station, is no longer valuable, said one European Space Agency official. The tight budgets in Germany keep getting tighter. In Italy, the new space minister has apparently installed a new policy. He only wants to spend money he has, and Italy has no money. The Germans, the Italians, I believe the Japanese and the other foreign partners recognize that they've got serious fiscal problems and that this space station is not worth the money and they can't afford to spend money they don't have on it. The unpleasant truth is that the dreams we've heard about and the destiny we have heard about will not be acquired for the $2.1 billion a year that President Clinton wants to spend for the next 5 years. That will not buy us a completed space station which can accomplish anything. The tens of billions of dollars extra will get us a scientifically inadequate space station which will have sucked dry the other programs, including the ones that will take us back to the moon and on to Mars. They are being abandoned. It's like the ship where you have run out of fuel and you consume your own sails and mast in order to keep the engine running. You can't continue to do that, and that is exactly what we are doing. The fact is we can't afford it, and that's the view also of the National Taxpayers Union, who will be rating this vote. Citizens Against Government Waste is rating this vote in their scorecard. Citizens for a Sound Economy, Businesses for Social Responsibility, the American Physical Society, the leading physics organization in this country, the Planetary Society, headed by Dr. Carl Sagan. Other civic, social, and environmental groups say this is not the way we should spend our scarce resources. They can be spent more effectively and more productively in space as well as on Earth. Please vote for the Roemer-Zimmer amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California for closing.
I would like to recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Meek, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks and to say that I support the space station.
Without objection, so ordered.
And now, Mr. Chairman, for the purpose of concluding the speakers on our side, I recognize another distinguished junior member, a sophomore member, actually, who will take the remainder of our time, which I think is 3 minutes.
The gentleman has 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to insert for the record a letter from the European Space Agency to Mr. Zimmer refuting virtually everything he just said.
The chair would say that needs to be done under general leave of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks especially to the gentleman from Indiana and the gentleman from Pennsylvania for their extraordinary courtesies in allowing me this time. Mr. Chairman, when I was a boy in Florida, my eyes first turned to the skies. I stood in my backyard in my bare feet with my family. Gazing toward the horizon, shading the sun from our eyes, we watched the rocket ships climb into space. They carried men named Shepard and Glenn and Cooper. They carried the American spirit toward a beckoning, endless frontier. I believe in the necessity of an endless frontier. I believe that killing the space station will kill the space program and keep us from reaching toward that frontier. Without the space station, there will be no ongoing mission for the space shuttle. Without the space shuttle, there will be no manned space program. And despite what some may say, without a manned space program, soon we will have no space program at all. Some say wait until later, wait until we can better afford it. We can't wait. If we wait, if we abandon the space station, then our international partners will abandon us and go into business with the Russians. They will finance and build a Russian space station without us, and we will be left to watch the further exploration of space from afar. Without the space station, our aerospace industry will wither away. We will lose our leadership in still one more area of manufacturing and industry, and we will lose the chance to live and work in space permanently and to discover wonders beyond our very imagining. Perhaps worst of all, without the space station, for the first time in our history, the American people will be left without a frontier. The lure of the ever-present frontier shaped the American spirit that has reshaped the world. If we turn away from the space station today, we will, for the first time in our history, be turning away from the challenge of the frontier and the best instincts of the American spirit. We will lose something unique in America. We will lose part of what it has always meant to be an American. Monday morning in Florida, I stood in my backyard in my bare feet with my family. My wife, Rebecca, and my 12-year-old son, Joey, stood by my side. I held my 2-year-old daughter, Jamie, in my arms, and together we watched the rocket ship called Endeavour climb into space. The shuttle's trace trailed along the horizon. The earth trembled beneath our feet. Once more, the American spirit soared toward the boundless, endless frontier of space. I am just one among many in this house, yet I speak for many today. I speak for those who fly above us now in the Endeavour. I speak for those who sent them there and those who preceded them there. I speak for every American, young and old, who has ever watched a rocket ship rise into space and dreamed of rising with it. I speak for Joey, who wants to make rockets, and for Jamie, who is still talking about that rocket ship she saw in our backyard. I speak for the very future of America as I challenge you. Be true to the American spirit. Reach toward the frontier. Build a space station.
Gentleman's time has expired. All time having expired on this debate, the question is on the amendment by the gentleman from Indiana. All in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask
Gentleman
for a
from
recorded
Indiana.
vote, and pending that, I make a request that a point of order. Okay.
The chair will count for a quorum. Does the gentleman withdraw his point
I
of
withdraw
order?
my point of order.
You're welcome. The chair will count for a recorded vote. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. Members will record their vote by electronic device. 215 having voted aye, 216 having voted nay. The amendment is not agreed to.